Let me explain briefly what we're going to do here today. We have certainly seen and read a great deal of information about the Mount Vernon Place project. People have been very forthcoming with their thoughts and ideas, and we appreciate that. There's a lot of honest passion about how to proceed with this project, and we respect that and look forward to hearing more about it today. What I'd like to do is and we have a sign-up list, by the way, folks who are interested in speaking. Hopefully you've signed up. We have a short presentation by the Conservancy to bring us up to date on where they are with the project and any sort of current or ongoing thoughts that have occurred there. We've also invited the Tree Alliance to make a presentation. I'm hopeful that both of those will be limited to 15 or 20 minutes. And then beyond that, if there are other folks who wish to speak, we're certainly welcome to have you speak. Hopefully, anybody beyond those two groups who wants to speak will speak to issues that haven't already been raised, and we would appreciate that. The charge today is for the Commission to try to make a motion, and we're being asked to make a motion based on the approval or not of a concept review only of the restoration master plan that's been prepared and presented to various groups along the way over the last numbers of months. So we're hopeful to get that far today, but we're anxious to hear conversations and things maybe we haven't heard to date. So with that in mind, if everybody will certainly be respectful of each other's opinions and ideas and give us an opportunity to listen to them carefully, then hopefully we can arrive at some decision today as to how this Commission wants to proceed. I think that we should say at the outset too, and I'll maybe say it again at the end, this is concept review. This project in any form and every form is subject to lots of other reviews by lots of other agencies of the city beyond us. Nevertheless, we'll see where we go with it, and then judgments will be made subsequent to that, I guess is what I'd say in a broad sense. So with that in mind, do you want to, we'll have a short report from the staff, I guess, and then ask the other folks to testify.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Would you want me to start now? I have a quick, short staff report just to get us up to speed of what has occurred in the last couple of months. This is a continuance of the December 14th, 2010 CHAP meeting. It is for the approval of the Mount Vernon Place Restoration Master Plan, which it will include landscaping, ADA accessibility, and to provide stewardship for future management of the park. The applicants, Lance Humphreys for the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy. Architects design team is Olin Landscape Architect and Urban Design Firm. And preservation planner Eric Holcomb, and staff for this has been myself and Stacy Montgomery. Just verification of posting. I actually did that with two boys in the back seat of the car during the snowstorm. So, the purpose of the master plan. This master plan sets forth a vision and overall strategy for Mount Vernon Place, generally addressing restoration, accessibility, and stewardship. The plan coordinates the preparation of detailed plans for restoration and accessibility and provides an outline for the public-private partnership for care and maintenance of Mount Vernon Place. Following the approval of the master plan, all detailed restoration plans for any work on Mount Vernon Place will be reviewed and approved by CHAP and will also be subjected to city permit approvals. CHAP has held the following public meetings. First, on June 23rd, 2010, CHAP convened a public hearing at the Garrett Jacobs Mansion and a site visit. At the hearing, the commissioners were introduced to the master plan. On September 13th, 2010, CHAP held a public hearing and took testimony from the applicant and interested parties. On October 12, 2010, CHAP held a public hearing and took testimony from the applicant and interested parties. And on December 14, 2010, CHAP held a public hearing and took testimony from the applicant and interested parties and made a couple of actions here. So on December 14, 2010, CHAP had two motions. The first motion was they moved to approve the restoration of the Washington Monument and masonry repairs in accordance with the plans submitted. This included the historic masonry, hardscape, and balustrades with the goal of completing the Washington Monument restoration by 2015. Staff will review and approve more detailed plans prior to restoration as detailed plans become available. The master plan principles for the restoration of the stone masonry met CHAP guidelines 8.1, identifying and preserving historic building fabric, and 8.2, masonry stone masonry. CHAP also had motion 2. This was moved to postpone a vote on other aspects of the plan until the February 8, 2011 CHAP hearing. In this period, the Commission asked that the Conservancy and concerned community constituents meet to resolve the remaining issues. The Commission asked that the Conservancy and community form a committee to do so. The primary concerns outlined in the primary concerns continue to be the removal and replacement of trees and the right-of-way issues related to the potential narrowing of the streets. As of December 14, 2010 hearing, the Commission had received 10 documents with a total of 1,931 signatures opposing the proposed removal and replacement of the trees, with 656 signatures from the surrounding community. Representatives of the institutions located on Mount Vernon Place continued to voice their concerns about the potential impact of their plan on their operations. These are matters of great concern to many of the Mount Vernon Place institutions, residents, and neighbors. So from the December hearing to today, we received the following new information. The institutions surrounding the park submitted a letter dated January 5, 2011 to CHAP. The Mount Vernon Place Conservancy submitted a letter and meeting report, both dated January 20th, 2011, and a PowerPoint that was presented to the Save the Trees Alliance during the committee meeting. The Save the Trees Alliance submitted a one-page outline dated January 31st, 2011 that is entitled, "We Need Old-Grown Trees, and More Importantly, in Cities." The Washington Park Company submitted an email dated January 30th, 2011 that supports the MVPC master plan. And the Save the Trees Alliance submitted minutes of the meeting between Mount Vernon Conservancy and Save the Trees Alliance on January 20th, 2011. And on February 7th, CHAP received 367 more signatures. Also to let people know that we also have received several emails today and other letters today for support and opposition, which we will read into the record. The CHAP staff has no new recommendations. The staff encourages the Conservancy Tree Coalition and the institutions surrounding the park meet as one committee and continue with our communications. So is there any questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes, does the staff have an old recommendation?
The old recommendation would be from the December hearing.
What was that?
We could look that up. It was concept approval
Concept,
with
okay.
several conditions.
Well, could we see that again? Because I gather that's going to be the subject of our discussion, right?
We have it.
As to what the conditions are.
We can pull up the PowerPoint from December.
Is it?
It's magic.
So these were this was the staff recommendation from December. The staff recommends approval subject to the following contingencies. All detailed restoration plans for any work in Mount Vernon Place will be reviewed and approved by CHAP, in addition to the proposed work being subject to city permit approvals based on construction drawings and detailed specifications. The Conservancy will not submit final drawings to CHAP for the perimeter sidewalks, will result in the narrowing of the current width of the roadway without a mutual acceptable agreement between the Conservancy and the affected institutions. The Conservancy will reach out to the petition authors, community residents, and public stakeholders that oppose tree removal in order to build consensus and support for the current or revised tree replacement plan. CHAP and planning staff will offer their guidance and expertise to the Conservancy in order to create and execute a comprehensive outreach program. The Conservancy will submit a plan for ongoing operations and maintenance, including a tree maintenance plan for existing and recently replanted trees. And prior to submittal of final drawings to CHAP for any aspect of the plan, the Conservancy will submit to CHAP an implementation and finance plan that phases the restoration plan, and I think there's two more. CHAP urges the Conservancy to prioritize the restoration of the Washington Monument and the park's hardscape with the goal of completing the restoration of the Washington Monument by 2015. And we also have a recommendation maybe of adding a CHAP commissioner as an ex officio member of the Conservancy.
Well, if you could go back, number 3, has that been met as far as the staff is concerned?
They had a meeting on January 20th, and the meeting minutes, I wasn't there, and the meeting minutes were sent to you, so that's really...
So that's been satisfied from the staff's point of view?
Let me address that. The commission at the previous meeting made a motion based upon the staff report and the testimony that was presented, and the motion made by Commissioner Higgins called for the Conservancy and the community and the stakeholders to resolve the issues through a committee. So today's meeting is actually a continuation of the December meeting. So that is for the commission to determine whether, in fact, the commission's motion has been met, because that was the direction of the commission.
I'm with you on that. What I'm trying to get at is the staff's recommendation. You start off saying the staff recommends approval of the concept plan subject to certain conditions, and is the staff position today that those conditions have been met or haven't, or you're saying you don't want the commission to decide whether the conditions have been met?
I don't think I think the commission will want to determine whether the expectations of the motion have been met in terms of whether the staff believes that the previous staff report on number 3 has been met. We do know that there was a meeting. There was a meeting, but beyond that, we don't know.
All right.
A meeting was held.
I want to turn over to Ms. Higgins, but just the basic point, usually we have a staff recommendation before we act, and I'm not quite clear on what the staff recommendation is, or maybe you will make it after the testimony is heard or at some future point in time, or you're not going to make a recommendation. But I think we ought to have before us what the staff recommendation is.
The staff has no new recommendation other than that the community, the Conservancy, the Tree Alliance, and the institutions should continue to work as a committee to resolve these issues.
Before the commission takes a position on concept approval?
I don't think the staff has made that decision.
We haven't
I
considered
think that's our
that, one way or the
decision.
other. But we're seeing that there still is concern among the people here in this room. And we would like to see cooperation
Well, we
for
have
the
many,
success of this plan.
all right, we have many things that come before us, that there's a division in the community, pro and con. We have to decide at some point in time. And what I'm trying to get at is, do we have to wait until there is an agreement between some group of people, or we hear testimony and then we act?
Well, I think that's a fair question, but I think that's the commissioner's issue. Yeah. So, okay, any other questions for the staff? Okay, invite the applicant to speak.
Good afternoon. Hello. As you all know, I'm Lance Humphreys. I'm the chair of the Restoration Committee of the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy. Today, our testimony is going to be brief, and we're not going to recap the plan for you, but we do have several of our board members here today who are going to speak to different aspects of kind of our goals and our of the master plan and different insights into what we're trying to accomplish. So first, I'd like to introduce our president, Henry H. Hopkins.
Good afternoon. My name is Henry Hopkins, and I'm president of the Conservancy. I'm a lifelong native Baltimorean and retired chief legal counsel of T. Rowe Price, where I worked for 36 years. One of my fondest childhood memories, was attending the annual Flower Mart at Mount Vernon Place, and yes, I did bring home those goldfish and little salmonella turtles, which are now, I guess, banned. Mount Vernon Place is also a special location for the Hopkins family, since it was the original location of the Johns Hopkins University, founded and initially funded by my great-great-great-uncle, Johns Hopkins. I am the current president of the Friends of Clifton Mansion. I am a director emeritus of Parks and People, having served on its board for many years. I have been a member of Baltimore's Parks and Recreation Board, as was my younger brother Fred. My late father Samuel Hopkins served on the Park Board from 1965 to 1977. He also served on the Board of Friends of Maryland Olmsted Parks and Landscape for over 10 years, on which I also served. I tell you this so that you may understand that my involvement with the Conservancy is not a recent phenomenon, but a continuation of my lifelong interest and experience with Baltimore's park system. This is one of the reasons I decided to accept the invitation I received in early 2009 to lead the Conservancy. Since 1965, when I first accompanied my father on one of his famous all-day tours of Baltimore's over, I think, 300 parks, I have witnessed the slow but steady deterioration of our park system. My father's great love of Baltimore and its many institutions taught me the importance of and critical need for citizen involvement and volunteerism. Unfortunately, Mount Vernon Place is a city asset that has been allowed to deteriorate to the point that it is but a shadow of what it once was. It is my firmly held belief that with the careful implementation of the comprehensive and expertly architected Olin Master Plan, Mount Vernon Place and the Washington Monument can and will be transformed into the world-class pedestrian-friendly park it should be. In conclusion, I wish to emphasize that the Conservancy was neither conceived nor created by a small group of individuals, but represents the product of over a decade of careful thought by a broad constituency of neighborhood organizations and interested citizens who believed that the park could and should be restored and then maintained and managed through the stewardship of the Conservancy. The Conservancy is committed to this goal and will make every effort to proceed in a manner that will be least disruptive to the neighborhood as humanly possible. We are committed to being an inclusive organization with broad representation on our board and open lines of communication to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hopkins?
Hello. Next, I'd plan to have one of our board members, and I'm pleased that she is on our Restoration Committee, Dr. Teresa O'Malley, present, but unfortunately, she has had a death in the family this morning. And so another member of our Restoration Committee, the distinguished preservation architect, Peter Perry, will read her testimony into the record.
This is Teresa O'Malley's written testimony, so I will read it as she has it here. My name is Teresa O'Malley, and I am a resident of Baltimore City. In my day job, I am an associate dean at the Center for Advanced Study at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. My doctoral degree is in art history with a specialty in the history of American landscape and garden design. I am a former president of the Society of Architectural Historians and current advisor for the U.S. Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Preservation. I would like to put this master plan under discussion into some larger context. The important thing to recognize about landscape preservation, as its leading practitioners acknowledge, you must transform to restore, and restoration requires transformation. The challenge is what distinguishes landscape architecture as unique among the design disciplines. In the selection of a landscape preservation firm, the Conservancy looked for a record of work that was based on well-informed understanding of historic significance and an ability to respond sensitively to the historic context while remaining true to new interventions of our own time and place. The work of the Olin Partnership stands out by virtue of its aspiration to wholeness, to viewing the entire scene, to understanding and managing all the natural and cultural processes at work in shaping our world. Their work is renowned internationally for its elegant convergence of preservation and environmental sustainability. I believe we have something to learn from them about Mount Vernon Place. With the master plan by Olin Partnership, I believe it is possible to pursue a final design to rehabilitate Mount Vernon Place so that one day it will be not only beautiful, but qualitatively better in multiple dimensions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions?
Request the letter?
Can we get a copy of that for the record?
This is it.
Thank you.
And finally, and then I'll be doing a wrap-up, I'd like to invite our last guest speaker other than myself, former Deputy Mayor Andy Frank, who's going to speak about, who was very instrumental in the forming of our concerns.
Good afternoon. My name is Andy Frank. I'm the newest member of the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy Board. I was lured to the board with the promise that there would be no controversy. That's not true. I actually am more interested in joining the board because of the controversy, because this project is so important. I just want to take a moment to tell you why I joined. Everybody in this room brings their own perspective. For some, it's restoring the park to a historical standard. For others, it's ensuring accessibility. And even for others, it's saving live trees. For me, it's economic development, but economic development defined more broadly as quality of life, quality of space, and creation of jobs. Safe, attractive, beautifully landscaped and programmed public spaces are critical to restoring and attracting residents to Baltimore City. And today, employers want to be where their employees want to live. When I was in City Hall, I helped establish, with the help of Councilman Kraft, the Waterfront Partnership of Baltimore, which is made up of Inner Harbor institutions and attractions, elected officials, and city department heads. The property owners around the Inner Harbor's public spaces agree to share in the cost of maintaining, landscaping, and programming the public spaces. They also share in the responsibility and burden of raising capital funds. The changes in the Inner Harbor have been dramatic, including the restoration of West Shore Park, which is beautifully maintained by the partnership. Long before there was the Inner Harbor, there was Mount Vernon Place, one of the most spectacular public spaces in the United States. If Mount Vernon is the cultural heart of Baltimore, Mount Vernon Square is the ventricle, pumping life, giving blood through the 4 public squares in the neighborhood. Now that I'm at Hopkins, I can use medical analogies. Sadly, the blood doesn't flow like it should, starving the public space of activity. The condition of Mount Vernon Place struggles much like the Inner Harbor did before the Waterfront Partnership. But that can change with the support of this plan and the work that would follow. As Henry Hopkins wrote in this morning's op-ed piece, the restoration of Mount Vernon Place is not inevitable. Absent a group like the Conservancy and supporters like Mount Vernon Belvedere Association remaining vigilant and advocating for the park's interests over time, benign neglect will continue unabated. With limited resources, Baltimore City can only do so much. The Conservancy is ready to move forward. We look forward to expanding our partnership, reaching across the aisle, as they say, to create a great urban space worthy of the neighborhood, the institutions, and the city in which this national treasure is so prominently located. Thank you.
So I'm back at the podium for some more mundane housekeeping. Did want to introduce into you all, we have a letter of support from Baltimore Heritage in support of the Conservancy that I don't think you've received yet. And we also have a letter from the Conservancy to the Mount Vernon Belvedere Association. This was some of the things alluded to in the CHAP recommendations about dealing with accessibility. And basically, this is a letter that we have crafted to the Mount Vernon Belvedere Association to ensure them that we are seriously committed to working on ADA solutions as this plan goes into more final plans and details in the
Is
future.
that something we've seen before? Is that
No.
new?
This letter?
No.
No.
Okay.
So, and with this, you will see that they're fully in support of our plan. So should I give this to Eddie here? Since the last CHAP hearing, I'd like to update you on what we've done and accomplished since the last CHAP hearing. And basically, as was mentioned by Eric, we did have a January 20th meeting with the group that had largely authored the tree petitions. We had guests from the Mount Vernon Belvedere Association there, and also Kevin Cleary from the Mayor's Office was in attendance. As you saw, we submitted our kind of understanding of how that meeting went, and as did the folks from the Tree Alliance. And as we've expressed in previous testimony, and then to kind of wrap up where we've been and where we are today, as we've expressed in previous testimony in the op-ed and in the op-ed piece which appeared in the paper today, even the most basic elements of the plan, ADA accessibility, sidewalk replacement, underground electrical service, irrigation, stormwater, removal and replacement of soil with high-quality soil for the replacement of trees, bushes, grass, and flowers to be planted, cannot be accomplished without removing the trees. We have the Maryland Department of Natural Resources report that actually CHAP commissioned, which basically confirms that understanding of a project of this scale. The layout of the trees is an integral part of the Carrera and Hastings classical design, requiring parallel rows of symmetrical, evenly matched trees. And to overlook this portion of the park's restoration is really to leave it incomplete. What we are suggesting here with this restoration master plan does not establish a precedent here in the city. In very recent years, I would say in the past 5 years, mature trees were removed and replaced as part of War Memorial Park Plaza and the Center Plaza renovations. Mature trees were removed and replaced along Pratt Street as part of the berm demolition, and they were also removed and replaced as part of the Charles Street streetscaping project. And so it's really part of these major investments in infrastructure and a bigger vision of what a space can look like, that this is kind of standard practice here even in the city. And of the approximately 100 trees, some are dead, dying, and not mature, and some of them are small and can be replaced. So the Conservancy has proposed a series of measures in response to the concerns about replacing the trees, and these were published in the paper this morning, but since I feel we should read them into the record, I will read them. That the number of replacement trees will match or exceed the number of trees removed. 2, the replacement trees will be 25 to 30 feet high and with 8-inch trunks. providing an immediate shade canopy, and there will be 6-inch diameter trees proposed for the sidewalk trees. Planting will occur in state-of-the-art process, for example, removing and replacing contaminated soil to ensure longevity and ensure that all the new trees thrive much better than anything that's currently there. No tree removal will occur until funding is in place to restore a complete square. And the Conservancy will phase in restoration to allow the city and public to judge the benefits for themselves. And lastly, we'd like to formalize, as was mentioned a few minutes ago, a standing committee with the representatives of the groups opposed to tree replacement to continue to work on discussing the issue. And with that, we look forward to moving forward with the project with CHAP's approval. And I guess at this time, are we still within our 20 minutes? Are we still within our 20 minutes?
Got a couple more.
Huh?
Couple more.
Well, then I'll bring in two people who will be part of our testimony, just to get them up here immediately. So the first would be Steve Shen, who's the chair of the Mount Vernon Belvedere Architecture Review Committee.
Thank you. I'm Steve Shen, representing the MVBA's Architectural Review and Development Committees. I'd like to just say that having attended nearly all of the meetings held about this subject, including the one with the members of the Tree Alliance, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly share my observations and summarize the two sides of the issue. In my opinion, the members of the Tree Alliance believe that the status quo in Mount Vernon Place is just fine, that we should do nothing or do nothing different. They have provided no alternative plan for fundraising to repair the hardscape or even to replace the many existing trees that are damaged, dying, or dead. On the other hand, the city, the Conservancy, the Mount Vernon Belvedere Association, Friends of Mount Vernon Place, Midtown District, and institutional and private individuals, whom I would call the silent majority, realize from actually working and surveying the parks that 40 to 50 years of deferred maintenance, piecemeal maintenance, and ad hoc management have led to serious damage to the historic fabric and the tree canopy of Mount Vernon Place. If you, Commissioners, agree that the status quo is acceptable, that the damaged and deteriorated hardscape is acceptable, that barring disabled persons from enjoying the 4 parks is acceptable, that stringing electric cables through and damaging trees every year during events is acceptable, that ignoring the substandard growing conditions is acceptable, and that there is nothing wrong with how Mount Vernon Place has been managed over the years, then you should vote no. But on the other hand, if you believe that the status quo is not acceptable, that we are the stewards of a national treasure and our vision must expand beyond the parochial borders of Mount Vernon, of the city, and even the state, and that this is the culmination of a 10-year effort and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rectify all these issues and to raise Mount Vernon Place to a world-class standard, which we in the nation can be proud of, then I urge you to vote, then I urge you to vote to approve the full wall-to-wall scope Olin plan that incorporates not only perimeter sidewalks, but also utility infrastructure. Make no mistake, the Olin plan meets or exceeds the highest federal standards for preservation and rehabilitation in a National Historic Landmark District. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then lastly, in our 20 minutes-ish, I'd like to introduce Kristen Speaker, who's Executive Director of Charles Street Development Corporation.
Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Speaker, and I'm the Executive Director of the Charles Street Development Corporation. The Charles Street Development Board has 50 members who represent the major stakeholders on Charles Street and include business, neighborhood, and institutional leaders in the corridor from the Inner Harbor to University Parkway. I'm here today to express our organization's support of the Mount Vernon Conservancy's master plan to restore the park. Charles Street was recently designated a National Scenic Byway by the U.S. Department of Transportation, one of only 4 urban byways in the country. It is the main street of Baltimore and contains world-class architecture, educational and cultural institutions, and historic neighborhoods. Mount Vernon Place is the heart of Charles Street and is worthy of the restoration provided for in the master plan. Olin Partnership and the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy have presented us with a long-term plan to restore and properly maintain these parks to ensure future generations can enjoy this special place. Investment in the future requires some sacrifice in the present. It will necessitate funding and some inconvenience during construction, but that is true of any major infrastructure project. As one of the most historic and beautiful urban spaces in the country, a long-term vision and plan for Mount Vernon Place is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is any written testimony that we can have for the record would be great. Thank you.
So that concludes our testimony for this time.
Thank you. Any questions now from the applicant? I appreciate your being consistent with the schedule. Thank you. Any questions for these folks?
The current position of the Conservancy is removal of all the trees except the elm, is that correct?
Yes, that's what is on record, yes. Oh, sorry, Andy, would you like to talk about that? I think Andy's been involved in this particular aspect. Oh, so we should talk about that now?
I think, what was the question?
I'm sorry.
I was just confirming
Yes.
that there's been no adjustment
Yes,
in your plan, and under your plan calls for removal of all of the trees with the exception of the large elm that's in the east square.
right, no, I'm sorry. That's where we kind of came into this meeting. No, as we discussed, and Andy knows, we have agreed to, if you have your blue chart in front of you, or Mr. Gibson's chart, that there were 4 blue trees that he had signified as being particularly noteworthy and worthy of keeping, and so we have agreed that we would save those 4
So
trees.
you've agreed to keep the magnolia in the south, and the 2, in addition to the elm, the magnolia in the south square, and the 2 sawtooth oaks in the west square,
In the west square, yes.
in addition to the elm.
Elm,
So
right,
that's your current position?
yes.
Thank you. Okay, welcome the folks from, and by the way, you shared with us, and we'll pass it out, thank you for a little outline of the people that will speak from the Tree Alliance, and we welcome you to give us your presentation. An outline of folks.
Mr. Chairman, what was the time break for each of the speakers again?
We've all decided generally to try to keep it at 20 minutes, and that's what you provided us an outline for, so we trust you can do that.
Yeah, this-
Can you ready to have,
Hmm?
can you ready to have this too?
Well, you can have this. We're not interested in each speaker, just exactly. I mean, just stay to within the time frame that you've suggested, and we'll be fine.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Hugh Ronalds. I have an engineering degree from Yale, an MBA from Harvard Business School. I'm a retired corporate financial executive and a 30-year resident of Baltimore. The next few speakers and I are speaking on behalf of the Save the Trees Alliance. We are an informal organization of volunteer petitioners to save the trees in Mount Vernon Park. Our website is savethetreesalliance.com. At the last CHAP meeting, December 14, I summarized my testimony as follows. The Conservancy is proposing a massive construction project, which is artistically unattractive, historically incorrect, ecologically and environmentally unsound, disruptive of the park and its neighborhood, with $18.5 million of mostly public money for a plan the public strongly opposes. We were very encouraged by the Commission's decision to ask the Conservancy to meet with us and form a committee to see if we couldn't work out our differences. We had understood that we would meet with equal numbers on both sides and with a city representative who would serve as a neutral moderator. And there would be a full and open discussion of the ways to save the trees. Instead, showing up with more committee members on his side than ours, the president of the Conservancy, without any discussion whatsoever, assumed the position of chairman of the committee, with the city representative acquiescing. Conservancy board member Lance Humphreys then gave essentially the same presentation as he has given so many times before. Numerous questions were asked and issues raised without adequate answers, such as the time involved, budget breakdown, inferior artistic nature of the plan, the lack of a meaningful historical record of such a plan, and most importantly, the disruption of the neighborhood and the wholesale destruction of the trees so beloved by the public. When asked if the Conservancy would consider alternative approaches that would be far less costly and invasive, we were told they would not. Furthermore, two of their board members, one of whom is their president, indicated they would withdraw their participation if the plan was changed. Finally, when one on our side pointed out that a more appropriate and modest irrigation system could be installed without the massive, costly earthworks construction, which would destroy all the trees, the Conservancy president, without discussion, abruptly ended the meeting. In summarizing the meeting, the Conservancy listed 5 items they would agree to. However, all 5 items were items already included in their plan. Magnanimously, they were offering to agree with themselves, not with us or anyone else. The Conservancy thus acted in bad faith, wasting the time of all participants and making a mockery of CHAP's explicit instruction to, and I quote, "reach out and meet in good faith to resolve matters prior to the February meeting."
My name is Regina Minnis. I live at 6 West Mount Vernon Place. I am a native Baltimorean and have lived in Mount Vernon for over 40 years. I am a realtor and have sold in Mount Vernon alone just over 80 homes. I've been a board member of the Mount Vernon Belvedere Association and have been on each of the committees. I am now a board member of Friends of Mount Vernon Place. I received a 1999 mayor's citation for my contribution to the civic welfare of my community. I have a 1986 degree from Johns Hopkins University. According to the Secretary of Interior Standards for the treatment of historic properties, there are 4 guidelines: preserving, rehabilitating, restoring, and reconstructing. Each has its own list of concerns. Throughout the Conservancy's material, I kept reading how Mount Vernon Square is going to be restored, rehabilitated, and/or preserved. But I am unable to tell which of the 4 Secretary of the Interior standards they are using. I certainly realize that these terms are constantly misused, but in this case, the word should match the Interior standards the Conservancy is following. The word I see most in their material is restore. And this is further assumed by the Conservancy's use of the Currier-Hastings plan, which does not exist. But it appears that the Conservancy has chosen rehabilitation, as revealed by the fact that they have copied the rehabilitation page of the Secretary of the Interior Standards as part of their package. And this was given to us on January 20th, and I have that rehabilitation page here. I want to emphasize that, in fact, if they are using the rehabilitation standards, but making the plan sound better by using verbiage from all guidelines, then it becomes quite confusing to their intent. Most importantly, on the first page of the standard for rehabilitation, and I'm assuming that all the commissioners know those 4 standards, I note to you item number 4, which states, changes to a property that have acquired historic significance on their own on their own right shall be retained and preserved. Surely, the present trees have obtained that status as evident to the resistance of moving them. Thank you.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, would you... Ms.
We have a question, thank you.
A speaker about two persons ago indicated that the position of the Alliance is that everything is fine in Mount Vernon and that really, nothing really must be done. And I guess presumably that all the trees should remain. Is that the position?
The healthy trees should remain, and I think that was a misinterpretation of the meeting. I don't think anyone in this room disagrees that the parks need help, and it needs a lot of care and maintenance. It's just we're just really basically against removing of the healthy trees, which also provides health for everyone and everything on the earth. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. At the meeting, was there any discussion focused at all on specific trees, or was the meeting all general? Did you at the meeting talk about specific trees?
No, we do not.
And at the last meeting in December, I gave a diagram. I don't know, in where I sort of went tree by tree. It seems that there are 49 trees that you remember the diagram?
Yes.
That I had in yellow that were dead or dangerously placed, had a life expectancy of less than 5 years, were planted too deeply or were obstructing the view. There were 49 trees. And is there a position that the Alliance has as to the removal of those 49 trees?
So you're talking about the ones that are...
Dead, dangerous, less than, according to their arborists, had less than 5 years of life, were planted too deeply, or were obstructing view.
Well, I think our main, basically the healthy trees, no matter what size they are, and if they obstruct the view, that's unfortunately too bad.
Well, there were 48 trees that were healthy, had a life expectancy of more than 15 years, that weren't obstructing the view. I'm sure, I know what your position is on those.
Right.
And then there were those that I had orange, which were 5 to 15 years, and I don't know, there's sort of a middle ground. But I'm particularly interested in what's your position with respect to the dead, dangerously placed, the roughly half.
Right.
Or do you disagree with those categorizations?
No, I think there should be like a revolving, and we actually have a speaker that will be addressing that next.
Okay, all right. I would like to hear the position of the Conservancy, not only your position, the Alliance. I know what your position is with respect to the healthy, mature trees. What is your position with respect to the ones that, at least on my diagram, I put as yellow using their chart?
Well, trees that are...
Dead, dangerous, less than 5 years, planted too deeply, or obstructing.
I'm going to let the next speaker, if that's okay, address that.
Okay.
We went out of turn because I'd like to address that question that Commissioner Gibson has asked regarding the trees.
Would you please introduce yourself?
My name is Jackie Ignatova, and I teach environmental politics and sustainable development at the University of Maryland in College Park. I live on the East Park, and I've been a resident of Mount Vernon for 4 years. I would like to make a few points regarding the notion of sustainability that the Conservancy has invoked as a rationale for the creation of 8-foot-deep cisterns surrounding the parks and the removal of 117 trees from Mount Vernon's parks. I'd also like to clarify our position regarding the trees. Olin's November 2010 technical report titled Ecological Services of Mount Vernon Place Trees mentions the need for the removal of 8 dead trees and an additional 6 trees that will die in less than 5 years. We're not opposed to the removal of those trees.
Unfortunately, the findings in different arborist reports are not consistent. The report that I have in my hand indicates that there's only a total of 14 trees that are in the dead and dying category. There are some that are arguably young trees, which I guess they consider to be easily replaced, but there isn't really an explanation for that in the report. So we're concerned about, we would like the removal of the dead and dying trees, which in this report is only a total of 14. So the report not only indicates that there's 14 dead and dying trees as opposed to the 44 that are dangerous, or there's conflicting findings, but it also addresses some of the key ecological services that healthy trees provide us. Shade from hot summer days, rainfall interception, as well as the absorption of carbon dioxide and other air pollutants that negatively affect human health. I am in agreement with these observations, and I believe the Save the Trees Alliance is as well. With that being said, the report makes important omissions, and there are major logical inconsistencies with the master plan. There's no mention of an alternative management plan that would remove just the dead and dying trees and a phased removal of the trees as they get older. What would be the carbon and air pollutant levels if you were to remove just the dead and dying trees and retain all of the other trees? Given Olin's own findings regarding the tree's capacity to intercept rainfall, there is absolutely no logical consistency regarding the need for the cistern, regarded by the Conservancy as sustainable because of the rainfall catch. And furthermore, it should be noted that there is no mention of the cistern in this report. The most significant omission is the environmental costs of such a project. The report goes to great lengths to discuss the future benefits of the master plan, again, without any consideration of other more moderate proposals, with complete disregard for the social and ecological costs. The creation of the 8-foot deep cisterns, which the Conservancy anticipates will take anywhere between 5 to 10 years to complete, not only apparently requires the removal of 109 alive trees, but it will also generate tremendous waste and emissions during this lengthy period of destruction and upheaval. There is no mention of the fact that during this large-scale infrastructure development project, there will be zero carbon and other emissions absorbed because all of the trees in the parks will be dead. There is no account of air, water, and noise pollution during the construction period. Thus, we only see a calculus of ecological benefits after the master plan has been implemented without any estimate or projection of the social, ecological, and economic costs during the construction process to all members of the Mount Vernon community. This means that this critical technical report is both incomplete and inaccurate. I would like to make one final point regarding the ultimate objective of this master plan. If the plan's objective, as we have been told, is to create a world-class tourist destination, I would like to ask the commissioners a question. Do you honestly believe that it's the inadequacy of the parks that stands in the way of achieving this objective? Or perhaps, as I would imagine most would agree, that it's the far more serious problems that Mount Vernon and the Baltimore community at large faces, namely the drugs and the crime. As a resident of Mount Vernon and one that enjoys the trees in the parks every day, I urge you to consider a more moderate plan to maintain the parks and reject this obscene waste of money in a city that has far more serious issues at hand. I hope that clarifies the position.
Well, let me just sort of clarify
Sure.
the numbers. The
Sure.
numbers, rather than use different arborist report, I've been using...
No, this is the Olin, this is their
Olin
master
report
architect.
has my numbers are as follows. There are 10 trees in their report defined as dead or dangerous. There are 5 trees which they have said have less than 5 years life. there are 19 planted too deep. Now, I don't know what that means, but I'm putting that in the yellow category. I assume planted too deeply means they're not going to live. I don't know what that means. All they said, they're planted too deeply. And there are 16 trees that they say are obstructing the view, but one of them is the magnolia. Since the magnolia is safe, we'll leave that aside. So that's how I get the 49.
I mean, I guess this is a problem of inconsistency, because this is their architect, this is the master architect,
I'm
Olin.
going by this.
I know, I mean, that's actually part of the problem, is that there isn't consistent findings.
So whatever the numbers are, you do not object to the removal of whatever the number is of the dead and dangerously planted trees.
Correct.
What about trees that have a life expectancy, they're 5, of less than 5 years?
I believe that we do not object to their removal.
Did you look at this category that they call planted too deeply? I don't know what that means, but do you know?
I
what that
also
means?
do not know what that means,
Now,
which
they're
is
mostly
something that
little
needs to be
trees, I can tell
clarified
you.
by the
Well, I went
Conservancy.
and looked at them. They are mostly perimeter, very small trees around, but there are a bunch of those. And then there are 15 trees that are in the middle of a plaza. There are 16 minus the elm, called obstructing the view.
We are opposed to removal of alive trees just for obstructing the view.
Okay. And then there are the 4 ones that have been mentioned that are safe. Obviously, your position is that they should continue to be safe, the
Yes.
elm. There are 44, by my count, healthy trees that, according to their report, have a life expectancy of more than 15 years. Now, the question is, at some point, I'd like someone to address the 20 trees that, according to their report, have a life expectancy between 5 and 15.
I believe that we are in agreement that there's a middle ground here, that we can come up with a management plan that includes the phased removal of trees as they get older. There's no need for this kind of shock and awe kind of project here. Does that clarify the position?
Okay.
I mean, I think this is also pointing to the fact that it's hard to understand these reports because there's inconsistencies, and these details need to be, made more clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I do have one other question.
Yes, sir.
Well, I've got actually 2 more questions.
Sure.
First of all, I think it's pretty obvious that the largest grouping of large, healthy trees, the location is in the east
Park.
right? Would you also agree that there's not much old or healthy other than the magnolia in the South Square? That the South Square is predominantly either dead, dying, very young, or pretty unhealthy trees.
No, I'm not in agreement.
Other than the big magnolia. There are 2 magnolias, but one kind of growing on, there's one big magnolia.
This might have been the trees that fall into the too deep category, which I think we both are unclear about.
No, you got 5 of them are fitting to that, but you've got in the South Square, I think the categories you've agreed could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13, 20, about 15. Oh, no, you got some in the middle, yes, but you don't agree the ones in the middle should go. Okay, well, all right.
Right.
Okay.
No, most of the ones in the South Park are obstructing the view, which if you do enjoy parks, generally you walk around the park, so it doesn't really obstruct your view. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thanks.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and members of the public and Mount Vernon neighborhood and community members. My name is Bia Riaz. I am a resident of Baltimore City since 1997. I am currently at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau as an attorney in their Housing Preservation and Community Economic Development Project. I have an interest in preserving the trees at Mount Vernon Park because I do live in that neighborhood. So I come here on behalf of the Save the Trees Alliance, as well as a resident of the city of Baltimore. The specific issue that I wanted to address today is the lack of community outreach, engagement, and involvement on the part of the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy. As we discussed earlier in this hearing, the December 14th CHAP public hearing, the staff report, page 9, staff recommendations, item 3 and 4, specifically charged Mount Vernon Place Conservancy with reaching out to the petition authors, the community residents, public stakeholders to build consensus and support for the current or revised tree replacement plan, indicating that the Conservancy should engage in a meaningful and substantive dialogue to review and discuss and revise the plan as presented. This did not happen. The January 20th meeting, as you can see from the minutes, did not engage the community in a full, meaningful level. The community, the neighborhood, the people who are interested in this still did not get a substantive part of this process and have not had a voice in this process. Many suggestions, questions, issues were either ignored or completely shot down. So this does not equivocate to a meaningful process. The CHAP and planning staff suggested that they would offer guidance and expertise to the Conservancy to create a comprehensive outreach program. I believe, based on the past few months of the history of the way the Conservancy has engaged with the Mount Vernon neighborhood community and the city at large, that this definitely needs to happen. They need your help. They need some guidance. They do not know how to properly reach out to the community. The January 20th meeting with Save the Trees Alliance did not reach out to anyone else in the community. This was direct contradiction to CHAP's directive. They stood firm on their position, and they were not willing to discuss or compromise. And a speaker that spoke earlier basically provided misinformation that the Save the Trees Alliance does not want any changes. That's not true. As Jackie mentioned earlier, the Save the Trees Alliance wants a healthy plan, a plan that protects the trees, but still allows for Mount Vernon Park to progress and bloom and succeed as not only a neighborhood park, but an important asset to the city of Baltimore, the state of Maryland, and as a national park. Basically, their demeanor was hostile and disrespectful to the community members that were present at that meeting. What is the solution to all of this? I realize that my time is short, so I'm going to wrap this up quickly. I can come up here, and all of us can come up here and talk about their failure to reach out, but it means nothing unless we offer some solutions. Our solution is to move forward, just as this esteemed board has recommended, to form a committee. And I believe that someone from Mount Vernon Place Conservancy also spoke earlier and said that they believe in reaching across the aisle and continuing a standing committee on this issue of reaching out and engaging and involving the community. The problem is, without specific directives and something written that's a commitment that outlines how that process is going to work, that's not going to happen. It's just going to be words on a page, and it's never going to be meaningful, and it's never going to be substantive. So they need a document, a proposal that's either an addendum to their proposed master plan that specifies how many times they're willing to meet with the community, what members of the community they're reaching out to, how they're doing this activity. Meaningful involvement can only be realized if the proposal is detailed in writing. More grassroots efforts need to take place. As the Save the Trees Alliance suggested at the January 20th meeting, these need to be in the form of larger public meetings. For example, our neighborhood is an amazing area for community resources. We have the Enoch Pratt Free Library that has a wonderful auditorium that's free for use. There have never been any meetings held there on this subject. The only time any of us ever heard about this proposal to remove the trees in Mount Vernon Park was when CHAP staff put up a notice in the park about a public hearing. By that time, a developer had already been chosen, a plan had already been proposed, so it's too little, too late for anyone to get involved once they found out about this public hearing. So in order to meaningfully involve the community, they need to have larger meetings and give people an opportunity to be heard and be involved in the form of a working committee that has, a voice in the process. I believe that if they formed a community commitment memorandum, some type of special partnership agreement that's attached to their current proposal, which would include a schedule of meetings and the method for dissemination of information and opportunities to hear and analyze the public comment, that would be the only viable method of moving forward and would be the only way to get some type of public support and appreciation for this plan. The only other thing I wanted to point out is in their very own proposal, page 4 of their proposal, under the section on stewardship, paragraph 2 talks about engaging the community and volunteers. Continue that the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy Plan will continue to encourage volunteer efforts that engage the Mount Vernon Place community and all of Baltimore. These sound great on paper. What does this really mean? We need to see something in writing from the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy on what exactly they're going to do to make this happen. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Are you collecting the testimony?
If you have it written, that'd be great.
Yeah, actually. I do have 2 pages of signatures that I'd like to turn in.
And I would remind you, I know we have a couple more speakers y'all have asked about. Let's stay focused on the time, if you can, please.
I will do my best. My name is Arthur Kutcher. I'm a resident of Mount Vernon Place. I'm a graduate of Yale University and the University of California, Berkeley, with degrees in architecture and environmental design. I was the planning officer for the old city of Jerusalem and its historical area. I've written 2 books on architecture, planning, landscape architecture. One is called The New Jerusalem, the other Looking at London, published by Thames and Hudson in London and New York, and MIT here as well. I was going to speak on aesthetics, and I will in a minute. I just want to make 2 points about technicalities about landscape architecture and trees. The 8-inch caliper trees being proposed by the Conservancy to replace the ones they're going to remove, the survival rate of these trees is much lower than trees smaller. And no matter how carefully done, the chances of some of them fail are fairly high. So the larger and more mature the tree, the greater the transplant shock. That has to be borne in mind. And also, according to good landscape practice, the canopy that the Conservancy maintains will be developed will happen a good deal more slowly than the plan seems to imply. As far as the excavation and the deep digging and the trenching, all this is to promote further, according to the Conservancy plan, further intensive uses of the park. But these intensive uses, again, according to good landscape procedures, are at odds with good horticultural practice because the plantings simply don't have time to recover from one use to the next. And I think we have to remember these are very small and very fragile parks. They're beautiful historic parks, and their overuse is the cause of much of the damage that we see. So a program of management and control of uses and events is extremely important and should be emphasized rather than great deep trenching, which will dig up the park for between 18 months and 7 years, depending on the scheduling that the Conservancy has set. I will try to be very brief about the aesthetic issues. The Department of the Interior has set out 4 categories of cultural landscapes which can be either preserved or rehabilitated or protected. Historic sites, ethnographically valuable landscapes. The 3rd category, which apparently the Conservancy thinks that the Mount Vernon trees, the proposed trees belong to, is an individual design or work of art representing the most significant style or period which gives the site its main aesthetic and historic value. I don't believe that's the case of the tree planting plan that's being proposed. The restoration of, or the repair certainly of the Curry Hastings plan is an important part, but it is not the element which gives Mount Vernon Place its historical value and makes it a National Historic Monument. Actually, that is the monument, to be literal. The fourth category that the Department of Interior says which would qualify a cultural landscape for preservation or rehabilitation or restoration is what they call an historical vernacular. This is quite different than the finished work of art. This is something that's grown up and evolved organically, representing the tastes and values of successive generations. Our Alliance are certain that the Mount Vernon parks are an excellent example of just such a vernacular, and that the present trees, the good ones, most of them, are an essential part of this vernacular and deserve appropriate protection and care. The trees, together with the surrounding architecture, combine to form what urban planners call, and most people recognize as, an ensemble, where the elements come together, playing their role in a process of mutual adjustment and accommodation. The spirit of the place. Each of the parks has its own character. They do not possess the Parisian classical uniformity of the Palais Royal or the Tuileries, cited as models by the Conservancy plan. This comparison is spurious and irrelevant. The Mount Vernon parks differ in their proportions, their lengths, widths, and their topography. The north and west parks are nearly flat. The east and south slope strongly down from the monument. And the architecture around the parks also display a distinctly non-classical quality of unity in variety. An eclectic richness of contrasting styles, heights, colors, materials, and details. A unique, individualistic amalgam of styles, which have blended together harmoniously over more than a century in the spirit of mutual accommodation. That is the spirit of the place. The spirit of the times, then and now. Each era expresses its own tastes and its values in its politics, in its view of the world, and in its art. We need, first of all, to evaluate and appreciate the Carrier-Hastings plan in its setting. Very nice, American City Beautiful Baroque of 1916. It was, by the way, at the time it was built, already out of date, already under strong attack, both around the world, in artistic circles, and here in Baltimore. It received a very, very critical reception from the local public and from the Sun and from H.O. Mencken, among all things. Can I quote you very briefly a couple of articles from the Sun at the time the plan was being proposed and being executed? 1917, Thomas Hastings. By the way, Carrier had died, but I believe in a car accident some 6 or 7 years previous to the plan. Thomas Hastings shows up and he offers his services to Mayor Preston to design the monument to Lafayette. We were about to go to war against Germany, and Lafayette seemed to be a perfect object for a monument. The plan was then developed, and in September 3rd, 1919, according to a Sun article, entitled, the headline, "Will Save Old Parks." That was, of course, the Frederick Law Olmsted Park, which the Carrier-Hastings plan more or less was going to destroy and replace. 1919, September 3rd, the Mayor Breuning, who replaced Mayor Preston, asked the New York architect Thomas Hastings to save as much of the old parks as he could. "We like them pretty much as they are," he said, "especially the Olmsted Pool and the West Parks." And then Hastings said he would come back in a few weeks with more details. Here's the revealing next article that we saw, January 5th, 1919. "Old shrubbery to go in the South Park. Quote, this is Mencken, long regarded by many as one of the chief attractions of the squares, the removal, the shrubbery in the South Parks, the removal seemed to surprise the Parks Board. They said the public had been given to understand that the shrubbery was not to be disturbed. J.C. Boyd, president of the Parks Board, hastened to add that the trees would not be disturbed, only the shrubbery, and then the trees were removed. July 7th, 1920, during construction, crust causes delay in the Mount Vernon parks. Excavation causes delays. Work held up. The contractor maintains the Mount Vernon parks have, quote, "the crustiest soil in America." They broke his steam shovel. He had to come in with workers with picks and shovels, and it took a good deal longer to cut through this crust, which is still there and will probably delay further excavation. August 29th, 1920, completion of the work, finally finished more or less. The president of the Parks Board had in contemplation, again Mencken writes, the president of the Parks Board had in contemplation some special treatment for the West Park at least to relieve the monotony of long green banks and lawns. That's the Carrier-Hastings plan as it was received at the time. And finally, December 5th, 1920, headline, "Artists unmoved by the new Mount Vernon parks. Charcoal Club, a local artist club, discusses modern Mount Vernon parks more in sorrow than in anger. Foe of newfangled stuns his hearers with a vicious onslaught in prose and poetry." So that's how they were received in 1919. The style American City Beautiful was on its last legs, if not gone by that time. It was outdated. It's a beautiful design, I don't dispute it. The trees, however, the tree part of it is another story entirely. There is no authentic tree plan that we can find, a complete one, to substantiate the Parisian uniformity. I'd just like to go on as quickly as I can. The spirit of the times, and our spirit of the times, involves a commitment to the ideal of humanity living in harmony with the natural world and with forms of life with which we have to share the planet. An ideal that encourages restraint and cooperation, not intrusion, disruption, and crushing dominance. One of the main purposes of public parks is to express and encourage these ideals of harmony. The spirit of our times is green-minded, environmentally alert, dedicated to sustainability, wholeness, public participation, cooperation, transparency, and accountability. So what is the conclusion of the matter? There appears to be only fragmentary evidence of the questionable authenticity for the Conservancy's landscape plan, a plan derived at second remove from 17th century French classical sources. It is thus a copy of a copy, and not a very convincing one at that, quite out of place in its present historical and aesthetic context. It is a plan lacking in imagination and deficient in creativity. It bears an unfortunate resemblance to a design by the State Highway Administration or the tree layout for a suburban parking lot. The Mount Vernon parks, the rich, eclectic variety of their architectural setting, the magnificent statuary in a number of styles, the landscaping and the trees planted by successive generations in a variety of species and configurations, all these come together to form an ensemble of mutual adjustment, an inspiring dialogue among its elements. One of this nation's most outstanding examples of our collective creativity, a unique cultural landscape, an American original. This is something people sense intuitively and explains the admiration and attachment they feel for the parks, their architecture, and the trees. A harmonious unity and variety. This is the best heritage of our time and of its spirit to be treasured and protected for our own benefit and for the good of future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get a copy of that for our records as well? Thank you. If you want to wrap up, yes, sir.
Very quickly. Excuse me. At this point, we believe CHAP has just three courses of action from which to choose. Number one, it could approve the plan as it stands or with minor adjustments or amendments. Given the growing public opposition and the Conservancy's failure to act in good faith as instructed by CHAP, this is obviously not a viable option. Number two, CHAP can suggest that the committee meet once again. The Alliance is willing to meet with the Conservancy again, but there would have to be sensible ground rules. Equal number of participants on both sides, a neutral moderator agreeable to both sides, and most important, the Conservancy would have to first demonstrate a willingness to significantly change the objectionable parts of their plan. Otherwise, we would just be wasting time once again. Number three, the third and final choice we believe is the best one. The Conservancy has clearly demonstrated its unwillingness to compromise or to alter or modify its proposals. In our discussions with them and in 4 successive review meetings here with CHAP, we believe it is now time to make a decision. We therefore recommend that CHAP finally and once and for all reject the deeply flawed remainder of the Conservancy's plan and save the trees.
Thank you very much. Okay. There are a number of folks who have additionally signed up, and I would suggest that we try to limit those conversations, first of all, to information perhaps we haven't heard, and secondly, to try to limit you all to maybe 2 minutes if we can each in terms of bringing testimony. We've heard a pretty well prepared, and I appreciate everybody's effort to keep track of time for us. And so go down the list of folks if you still wish to speak. You're more than welcome to. Mr. Mason.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Malcolm Mason, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm Malcolm Mason. I'm the National Historic Landmark Steward for Mount Vernon. This was created really by the will of the people of Mount Vernon at the time. First the National Historic District, then the district became a National Historic Landmark, which is the cream of the very cream of national monuments. It's not simply a monument, it's a landmark monument.
Closer to the mic.
I urge you all to be very careful in dealing with this. This is a precious, precious area. The whole of Mount Vernon is a National Historic Landmark. It's centered about the Washington Monument, which in itself is a very, very interesting structure and a national treasure. It is in fact the crown jewel with subordinate jewels about it, but it is the crown jewel of the National Historic Landmark, which is Mount Vernon. There are 3 classical column celebratory monuments in the world. Hadrian's in Rome, Nelson's in Trafalgar Square in England, and our own Washington Monument on Charles Street. Our Washington Monument on Charles Street is the largest and most heroically splendid monument. Let's give it a great setting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Tabinda Reyes.
I already did.
Okay. Abe Greenstein.
Sorry. My name is Abe Greenstein. I am a resident of Mount Vernon Place. I've lived there for a few years and would like to live there for a lot longer. I've kind of followed this thing from the beginning. I don't know if the committee remembers. I've emailed before everything. I even tracked down Mr. Can's personal cell number from his office staff one time. But, I'm really concerned about the plan. I've always made my objections and problems known, and the Conservancy really hasn't responded to it at all. I even went to the meeting, raised my objections, and Mr. Humphreys told me that he had nothing for me. And the real kind of crux of it is here we're talking about disrupting the neighborhood and our street for a number of years, and it's going to put a hole in the city. And this can cause a lot of damage to the area. It may displace residents, and really kind of take away, in Baltimore, there's not a lot of urban spaces that are safe, easy, and accessible. And Mount Vernon Place is one of them, and I just don't know why you'd want to mess with it so comprehensively. The park needs some tweaking, but it's kind of beautiful the way it is, and I really want it left alone. I think there's a reason you see the opposition. It's all residents. Most people pushing the plan, I don't really know them. I haven't seen them around. That's about it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is it Kim Forsyth? Kim Forsyth?
Good afternoon. I am Kimberly Forsyth. I'm currently a resident of Reservoir Hill. I am a former resident of many Baltimore neighborhoods during my lifetime: Milford, Roland Park, Bolton Hill, Mount Vernon, and Reservoir Hill presently. I am former committee chair of committees in Mount Vernon and in New Greenmount West Community Association. And ironically, I was a renter in Mount Vernon when I was depended upon for many hours as committee chair of 2 committees. I am an expert in the analysis of cities, towns, and states as the former director of municipal research for both Alex Brown and Legg Mason. I managed $6 billion personally in assets. My responsibility was to project the impact of such decisions on the economic viability of cities, states, and towns. So I understand and project the impact of these changes and I would therefore like to request that you do so. I would like to address a member of the Mount Vernon Belvedere Association's, and this is not a member of the board of the association, criticism that only those who live in Mount Vernon should have a right to an opinion about it. I actively pursued the preservation of August Rowland's house on Cathedral Street that is on the National Registry of Historic Places and was a former residence of a member of Johns Hopkins, and I lived in Roland Park at the time. I actively pursued the maintenance of a tree on Eager Street when it was run into by a car, and I literally put my body in front of it and prohibited the city people who came to tear it down from doing so. I was then promised that that tree would be replaced immediately. It was a 30-foot tree because it had been hit by a car, and it was not replaced. Many who are here or who have obviously previously testified on behalf of the proposal do not reside in Mount Vernon, but have very much a right to an opinion about the impact. Many, as we know, who have avoided supporting it have done so because of the potential converse impact on their businesses. Some who support it have actually not been able to because of that impact. There was actually a written letter sent to a new business in Mount Vernon by a resident of Mount Vernon threatening that business with active boycott if they allowed people simply to see the petition in their business. They had not come out with a formal response to their support. They simply were making the petition available. The developers in Station North, for example, many of them don't reside in Station North, but they are directly involved and responsible for its renovation. I would also like to note the increasing popularity of parkways across the United States. The reason parkways have become increasingly popular is because of the existing historic trees that exist. If you look at neighborhoods and cities where new trees are being planted, the property values and the benefit to those neighborhoods wait 30 or 40 years till the trees are mature before those neighborhoods see that benefit. Decisions such as this have obvious long-term impact on the quality of life in the city of Baltimore and therefore on the desirability as a place to both live and do business. I hope that CHAP seriously considers the magnitude of the obvious opposition to this plan. Thank you.
Let's see where it spoke. Anatoly Ignatov?
Hi, my name is Anatoly Ignatov, and I live on the East Park. I am also an instructor at Johns Hopkins University. I teach sustainability and political theory, and since today's discussion is focusing on the concept of the master plan, and all I do for work is interrogating concepts, I wanted to draw your attention to three different conceptual limitations of the plan. First, we're told the Conservancy is a public-private partnership. We've seen the private already. My question is, where is the public element of it? And how does one get lured to become a member of the Conservancy, for example, if they were not a deputy mayor of the city? First question. Second, we are told that the project is very sustainable and aims at ecological benefits. However, for me, from my research experience, it seems that sustainability is merely an empty conceptual device that is referring both to violating the environment in order to remove 103 trees and then healing the environment from the wounds they have inflicted upon it by replanting 102 trees, or whatever the number now has changed. Third, conceptually, the plan involves a mix of very heterogeneous arguments that are not coherently related to one another. Nothing from the arborist reports or the technical reports, and I've read them all, necessitates the removal of the trees. That's why we're introduced the necessity of developing an 8-foot deep cistern which is going to capture rainfall, which otherwise can be captured by the ecological services provided by the trees and other moderate measures. On the other hand, nothing in the technical report even assesses the ecological costs, as we already saw, of digging up in this massive earthworks project. We've already seen the historical inconsistencies of the plan as well. We're told that the Conservancy has a very broad vision. Unfortunately, they've been failing to see beyond their own point of view. And until they broaden their scope and incorporate some of the objections and start communicating meaningfully, I urge you to reject the current concept of the plan, let them earn the respect of the community, and of course we're all for the maintenance and the stewardship of the park, and we would endorse working with them, especially once we see how successfully and effectively they conduct the repairs of the Washington Monument. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Peter Merles?
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Merles. I'm a 26-year Baltimore resident, and for the last 6 years, I've been Executive Director of the Midtown Community Benefits District, which includes the Mount Vernon Squares. Also, for the last 5 years, I've been a member of the Board of Directors of the Friends of Mount Vernon Place, a group of very dedicated volunteers who give a lot of personal time, effort, and money, labor in planting and maintaining the park as it is now. The Midtown Community Benefits District Board has not had the opportunity yet to take a formal stand on the Conservancy. However, our offices did encourage me to come here today and share with you some of the practical realities that our staff, who provide the daily maintenance in those squares, have to deal with, and how that impacts on the tree situation. We've heard of, I moved to Baltimore 26 years ago because of a chance detour on my way from New York City to Richmond. I fell in love with several aspects that I saw on that quick drive, one of which was the Mount Vernon Squares, which really awed me. And I think most of us, as casual visitors to the squares, can't help but be impressed with them. It's only when you're there day to day and trying to keep those trees alive, trying to keep those shrubberies alive, trying desperately to grow a lawn there, that you realize how bad the situation is. You've heard about the need to improve the infrastructure. Well, there practically is no infrastructure left to be improved. The drainage systems, the drains in the sidewalks that are supposed to carry away rainwater are totally non-operative. When it rains, they puddle, water doesn't go down. The sidewalks themselves are so badly damaged that they are hazardous to walk on. Part of that is due to tree roots, but most of it is due to concrete spalling. The balustrades are crumbling to the touch, and several have been on the verge of falling. I think some have actually fallen and been propped back up. Marble steps have collapsed, and the railings along the steps have come down and have been propped up. We work in a close partnership with the City Department of Recreation and Parks. We handle most of the day-to-day maintenance, the heavier chores. We call on them, and we partner and decide what resources are available. By and large, the city has not had the resources to do any of the serious work that needs to be done. The irrigation system, well, there is no irrigation system currently. There are some spigots that we have to hook up hoses to, and I remember an extensive meeting sitting in Mr. Stosser's office once where we were trying to figure out with Rec and Parks what could be done to get some of those Murdoch valves, as they're called, in operation. Clearly, the groundwork that needs to be done will have a direct impact on the trees. Just as we learned when we did the landscaping on Charles Street, when we do that digging that's going to take to replace the sidewalks, to dig up the existing water lines, electric lines, and non-functioning drainage system, it will do extensive damage to most of the trees there, even the healthy ones. That creates a situation where if we've got new sidewalks, new walkways, new curbings down, and a large older tree starts to fail within a few years after that work is done, the trees will topple, and they may tear up the sidewalks, the new work that has been done. So from a very practical point of view, we recognize the need in most cases to replace many of those older trees. It hurts. We all love those trees. Those of us who've been tending the park and taking great pride in it all these years recognize the pain and the concerns and share the difficult feelings, but in reality, we think it is the right way to go. We therefore would really encourage the commission to move ahead and approve the plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
William Green?
Good afternoon. I am the chairman of the trustee board at Mount Vernon Place United Methodist Church, which is across the street from the Big Elm, which is safe. So I won't go into a lot of details about who I am and what I've done because I've been here before with you. The church is divided about whether or not they support the tree issue. The park, the concept, the plans that is being offered here by the Conservancy, we're in full support of. Having said that, we have voted and as a general rule are in favor of the plan as is with the tree removals. Would like very much for the Conservancy to try to mitigate that as much as possible. I'm very encouraged that they're going to at least try to leave a few of the trees. That was a suggestion that we made once before. I'll make that is pretty much the summation of what I have to say. The only other thing that I would say is that I do sort of disagree with the concept that the parks, the only people that should have a voice in the park in this design are the residents of Mount Vernon Place. The park, the monument belongs to all of us in the United States. It's the national monument to George Washington, the first one. And I think the broader you make that, the better it is for everyone. But as I said, we do support it, and we wish it the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Sharkey?
Hello. I'm director of the Peabody Institute, which is the other side of Bill Green's Methodist Church. We have 650 college students, 1,700 or so pre-college students and their parents who come to Mount Vernon throughout the week for music and dance studies. My own institution, we have divided opinion amongst the students who are concerned about trees, and I think anyone who cares about nature, of course, would be concerned about trees. But what I say from an institutional perspective is the greatest shame would be if we do nothing with these parks. The park in front of Peabody, to my eyes, is one of the least used. It's certainly not used by our student, faculty, and staff population compared to the other parks. It feels dangerous, it feels overgrown, and I see us opening our doors to the front far more than we used to. In 2004, we had a renovation. Our building's from 1865. A little bit like the park, it looked very handsome on the outside, but that belied a lot of crumbling infrastructure. And of that $40 million campaign to restore our building, a lot of it was hidden, unseen infrastructure that if we did not address, we wouldn't be preserving the future of this wonderful institute for the city of Baltimore. So overall, we feel this is the moment to do something to make these parks, restore them to some of their previous beautiful glory. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric Davidson?
We have 3 or 4 more speakers, so I hope we can work our way through this so then the commission can take whatever action we choose.
Good afternoon. I'll be quick. I'm with the Maryland Disability Law Center, and our concern is the accessibility of the park. We feel like the parks should be accessible to everyone. I just recently moved to Baltimore from South Carolina, and I don't have a prepared talk. I'm from South Carolina, so we're normally not prepared. But the park is something that should be accessible to everyone. And right now, there are 2 marginally accessible entrances out of the 28 entrances to the park. The plan as drawn will make 14 of those entrances accessible. I agree with the last speaker, though. The worst thing we could do is do nothing. I think it was Walter Chrysler that said, more is lost to indecision than to bad decision, and we certainly don't want a bad decision, as my daughters always use that statement against me for their bad decisions. But we think good decision is a change that will make this park accessible, and so we support the accessibility aspect of the plan as now proposed.
Thank you.
We have Joan and Tom Spence.
Thank you for the opportunity, for this opportunity to speak. I was very much my name is Joan Spence, and I live on Mount Vernon Place. But before that, I was very much involved in the establishment of the Eleanor Roosevelt National Historic Site at Hyde Park and the creation of its master plan by a team composed of National Park Service, Dutchess County Planning Department, and members of the not-for-profit organization Eleanor Roosevelt's Valkill. So I'm very aware of the importance of a master plan, such as the one that is being developed to guide this project. It's really the foundation of all future endeavors, and that's why I urge CHAP to reject the plan in its current form, or at least to attach to it conditions so that people cannot proceed until those conditions have been met. John Dorsey's, Baltimore's beloved art critic, wrote that Mount Vernon Place is considered the heart of Baltimore, as somebody else alluded to. It belongs to the 19th century, when the city formed its architectural character and its historical essence. He said that Mount Vernon Place is a place where people lived and where they still do live, and that it encompasses a wide variety of 19th century architectural styles. Its architectural streetscape is not uniform, nor should its landscape be. In addition to my concern about what I perceive as a sterile plan, I object to the proposed 6-foot sidewalks along the long sides of the parks. Practically, if they reduce the road pavement, they will wreak havoc on traffic and parking. And even though the representative of the, city transportation department said that double parking is not allowed, if you live in Baltimore and don't believe that there is double parking, I don't know what, because it happens everywhere. So I don't understand how you can put the 6-foot sidewalks and reduce the pavement and still have no impact on traffic or parking, with Charles being one of the major north-south routes. Or if I've also heard, and I've been unable to find out what exactly the plan has now, but I have heard that they had agreed to reduce the they had agreed to take the 6-foot sidewalks from the parks themselves, which would reduce the historic footprints of the parks, which certainly should be unsuitable for a plan purportedly based on history. I was very enthusiastic about the formation of the Conservancy when I first heard about it. It was something that when I was involved with the Friends of Mount Vernon Place, we were for. But now I'm saddened, really, by their lack of willingness to compromise. This does not bode well for future relations between the Conservancy and the residents, and we are fully aware that we are privileged to live in one of the finest urban spaces in the United States, and that the world looks at our space, and we want to work with those who will be good stewards of the parks, those who will show the same sensitivity to what is there as John Russell Pope did when he designed the addition to Stanford White's Garrett Jacob House. It's a single design, so that we ask CHAP once again to protect Mount Vernon Place as it did when early in its history it prevented the destruction of the townhouses at 22 through 33 East Mount Vernon Place. I believe that was one of your first decisions. We hope you will continue in that tradition. Thank you.
Thank you. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Tom Spence. I also reside on Mount Vernon Place with my good wife. Let me extract things. The plan for CHAP as proposed should not be accepted. Its starting point is let's do a major revision of the planning, and the guideline is the classical French garden, which is 17th, 18th century concept. However, Mount Vernon is a 19th century American original, and any attempt to find authentic architectural purity is a fool's errand. However, there is underneath it all some underlying sense of style, and responsible people would agree we must preserve that. I think that this, in a sense, is an inverse of Potter Stewart's famous comment on pornography. Everybody agrees we should fix the Washington Monument and the balustrades. No contention on that. But the rest of our plan is not ready for prime time. I use a 21st century phrase for a 19th century environment. There are unresolved questions about sidewalks and their impact on traffic and how is access for the handicapped provided. And many other questions have come up here today. However, I think there are procedural points which I don't think CHAP alone can resolve, but you are people of influence in the city of Baltimore, and I think you could use your influence to effect some changes. Restoration and maintenance of the parks has to be a judicious mixture of public and private sectors. The importance of the parks to Baltimore City and its surroundings cry out for a conservancy with broad powers to guide the direction and implementation of improvements to the parks. The cost of this will obviously exceed the ability of overstressed city and state government to do the job. One has to have the commitment, both financial and technical, of people who will support the effort. The Conservancy will need a component of private citizens who will give much of their time, money, and expertise to support the parks. However, the major portion of funds will still come from the public purse, and therefore the Conservancy should have members appointed by the City Council subject to proper criteria serving for fixed terms. In other words, the Conservancy needs a carefully drafted charter enacted by law. Its power and significance depend no less.
Thank you.
James Dilts. Jim Dilts here? No?
He was here earlier.
He was earlier. Jane Shipley?
Good afternoon. My name's Jane Shipley. My family's been in Baltimore for 200 years at least. I'm a lifelong resident, and I'm very happy I haven't moved away because my fellow citizens make me very proud to be a Baltimorean today. My husband and I have renovated a house on 25th Street. Since everybody's giving credentials, I'll give mine. I have a BA in Latin from the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. And in Williamsburg, Virginia, there are houses that were, these dates are not exactly accurate, but there'll be a house that burned down in 1710 next to one that was not constructed until 1720, and they exist today. It's a reconstruction of vernacular. Robert Embry, who is my friend, would be able to tell you I was involved very intimately with the initial idea to homestead Otterbein and Berry Circle. I love Mount Vernon Place. I believe also that it's the heart and soul of Baltimore, and the tulip magnolias in the East Square bloom on my birthday every year. So I love those trees. Bob just reminded me that your charge is not to be concerned about the environment or the economy or traffic, but only to be concerned about historic preservation. Is this plan will this plan enhance historic preservation in Baltimore? That's what you're going to have to decide. The trouble is that your decision is going to have an impact on all of these other things. And something else that has been alluded to here. I'm going to start with two givens. One is given that the parks need work. The question then is, how best do we achieve it? The second given is that the people in the Conservancy have good intentions, but the question is, how best do they express it? I am a Democratic American, and I believe in government, and I believe if our city government is not working properly, that it's our right and responsibility to make it work properly. I do not believe in private organizations taking over the role of government in our city. So, how are the members of the Conservancy chosen? Who will they answer to? What kind of lease agreement? Someone asked public-private arrangement, what is the public part? And I said the public part's the money. I have some background with this, and again, I know this is not your charge, but your decision is going to have an impact on this. I have background in this. I fought really, really hard to save Pratt Libraries in Baltimore City. They were going to close 10 in 1991. Since then, they have closed 7. I was a named plaintiff in a lawsuit that accused the Pratt trustees of operating behind closed doors, which they admitted that they were doing, and their excuse was that they were a private board running a public library with public money. And even though a federal judge had told them that they were not, and even though the Open Meetings Compliance Board had told them they had to have open meetings, they continued to have closed meetings behind closed doors because they said, no Baltimore City judge had told us this. Well, we finally got a Baltimore City judge to tell them that. It is a terrible, terrible situation to have a private board running any part of our city. The heart and soul of our city is Mount Vernon Place. We all should be working together. We shouldn't be private. We should be together, all of us. We shouldn't be saying that, we know best how to spend the public money. We should be going to the city and saying, we need this money. How can we phase it in? And I'm just going to end with one more point, okay? Anyone who paid any attention to the Micah student who put a fence around Mount Vernon Square 2 years ago will know that if your construction plans involve putting up fences, you're going to, all kinds of people who don't know about this yet, and believe me, there are a lot, will be on your backs. So I really urge you to not only think about the historic accuracy of this plan, the historic preservational merits of this plan, which I think are nil, but I urge you also to think not only of individual elm trees and magnolia trees, but also the environment, the economic ramifications of this, and the larger social ramifications of the Baltimore City getting out from under its obligation to take care of its parks and having a private group do it when it's our responsibility and our right. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, is there anyone else here who wishes to speak that didn't sign up to do so? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Kelly Aronoff, and I forgot to sign up.
Kelly Arnold?
Kelly Aronoff.
Could you please spell that?
A-R, on, off, like a light switch. I was born at Hopkins, and I live in the city, and my family lives in the city too, and we all live in Mount Vernon, the cultural district. And I had no idea about the trees until I got word of mouth from my mom, who got word of mouth from somebody else. And I went on Facebook, which is a networking site, and created an event. And in 2 days' time, I got 10 people to say that they would like to come, but they couldn't because it was only 2 days' time. And I feel like that my community at large doesn't really know what's going on. And I'm a renter, so I heard that some information was passed on to people who own, but I live in a building of 6 people, and 4 of them rent. And I know that the people who live next to me are all renters, and I know that they go to Peabody, and I think they would be interested in all this information that's going on today. I know that a lot of Micah students create art in the park and have done art projects through the park. And I remember when they put up the fences and I had a freak out because I was like, what are they doing to the park? This is just ridiculous. But it was nothing, and it made me aware of how much I go to that park and how much I love that park and how much it would upset me if there were fences there all the time and I wasn't able to walk through the park. And I think that as a resident and a person who goes to school here and is probably going to live here forever, I would like to have more public information that maybe the council today put off making this decision, I think that it is important to improve on the parks. And I think that this plan could be excellent, but I don't think it's excellent right now. And I think that it would be wise to, have these alliances come together, or maybe a public forum. I mean, there's a community center right there too that could have open forums of people talking, exchanging ideas of what they think is important for the park, because we all live there and we had no idea what was going on, and I think that it's important.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Okay, I think, Jackie.
Hi, sorry I didn't sign up. I signed on something. I thought it was the appropriate sheet. My name is Jackie Carrera. I'm the president and CEO of the Parks and People Foundation. I am also the chair of a group that created a national model for urban and community forestry. I am a co-PI on the Baltimore Ecosystem Study, which is an urban long-term ecological restoration study here in Baltimore City. I live in Roland Park. I worked as the chair of our open space planning committee for our master plan. So I come to you and I only tell you these things because those are experiences that I've had that have given me a lot of perspective about parks, environment, urban ecosystems, urban planning. And I can safely say that this is not easy, and I don't envy any of you all. I can also safely say that I commend every single person here in this room for coming with their perspective, with their opinion, with their passion, and sharing them in this very, very important process. About 10, 11 years ago, I worked with a group of people that started an organization called the City Parks Alliance, because there's a real vacuum in public advocacy around city parks and public parks around the country. So in that time that I've spent, I've talked with a lot of people around this country about the state of their parks, from Chicago to Louisville to St. Louis to wherever. And everyone is struggling with the same issues. And this is not something that is unfamiliar to you, that you don't know, but there is a real lack of investment. And I will say both from the government side, as Jane pointed out, but also on the private side in cities across the country. So it is very encouraging for me to see how many people here came out and just to talk about how to improve Mount Vernon. Our board has not had the chance to review the plan, but what they have had the chance to do is to talk about the importance of a conservancy in dealing with an issue like the restoration and Mount Vernon. And so my only comment here today is to say to you that the conservancy model is one, as a public-private partnership, that can help, and the way that it's been presented to me is one that appears that it can and will be very effective for Baltimore. There's a process, and I'm a process person, so I encourage good process. There are things that seem to be able to be improved in this process, but we don't want to stop progress, and we certainly don't want to stop the energy and the passion of good people who have come to volunteer their time to put together a plan that will protect that park for future generations. So with that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. We have one more comment, and then we'll wrap up.
Hello, I'm Gary Vicon. I'm the director of the Walters. It's much more interesting to be here than in my office today. It's a great to hear the passion, intelligence, and deep background on this. It's quite incredible. I've been in 5 West Mount Vernon Place, where my office is, in the master bedroom of the Walters house, for 17 years, looking out on the West Park. The good news is Mount Vernon has come back to life. The bad news is the park has gone to hell. And I don't think you can lose sight of that. The park is a mess. The park that I see is a mess. The good news is people care about it. Could I imagine this conversation have taking place 15 or 20 years ago? I don't think so, not with this intensity. The bad news is that I don't think anybody would disagree that the Conservancy folks could have done better, and I think a lot better, in communicating their story to the community. And I say that as a stakeholder right on the park. And we had a bumpy ride, but we wanted to get to the other side so I could be an advocate for the possibility that this wonderful park could be realized for the potential it really has, as an addition to what is a fantastic square
and a compliment to all of us on that square and to the city of Baltimore. So if I wanted to leave two messages, one is don't let this moment pass, and two is be prepared to take the long view. Thank you.
Thank you. If you can make it brief, we'll give you one more.
My name is Drew Rieger, and I live a block from the square. I've lived in Baltimore for 42 years. My family goes back to the 1870s in Baltimore, and I know that my great-grandfather saw the monument as the first thing he saw coming into the harbor. So we can all agree that's an important architectural piece of Baltimore. I studied environmental engineering at Johns Hopkins and also music at Peabody. I did graduate studies in geography at Maryland and taught cartography. I was also the head of the map library at the Johns Hopkins University. And I also was an intern for the Baltimore City Office of Planning and the Maryland State Office of Planning. And when I was interning there, I had to work on a Baltimore habitat assessment, which basically involved me standing there with a light table for an entire summer and counting every single tree in the city of Baltimore and calculating the % tree coverage. And I can definitely say that Baltimore is already one of the greenest cities in America. We have Leakin Park, which is 8,000 acres. It's one of the largest municipal parks in the country. Wyman Park, the list goes on. The environmental impact, in my opinion, of removing those trees is completely negligible. A mature tree absorbs about 100 pounds per year of carbon dioxide emissions, and considering rounding to 100 trees, the entire impact of those trees only absorbs the carbon dioxide of one human per year. It's really quite negligible. I also wanted to speak about the historical plan, which I've heard several people refer to earlier as a 19th century plan, but I really do believe that the current hardscaping on the square is a 20th century plan. It's a Beaux-Arts plan. Carrere and Hastings were one of the preeminent architectural firms of the period. They did the Frick Gallery in New York. They did the New York Public Library. They did Nemours Mansion, which I recently toured. It's the largest French-style garden in America up in Wilmington, Delaware. And though they did use prior architectural styles from the 17th, 18th centuries, the 16th century, it is a particularly American architecture that was very popular to people who lived on the square at the time that it was instituted. And if you actually walk around the square and look at the styles of the buildings, you will find that quite a few of them are Beaux-Arts style. For example, the Walters Art Gallery is a Beaux-Arts building done by Delano and Aldrich, I believe 1906. Correct me if I'm wrong. You can also see the Marburg House, which was renovated from a previous Greek Revival house into a very beautiful Beaux-Arts building. Elements of the Engineers Club, that's a bit earlier, but it definitely fits that. The Severn and Washington Place Apartments, which is probably the predominant building on the square, is in the Beaux-Arts style. So I think if we really want to look at a plan that unifies all of those architectural elements and also is historical, it is to restore the Carrere and Hastings plan, which almost all the hardscaping is there. And given that, if you look at photographs from the early 20th century and even the late 19th century with the previous plan, that the trees are pretty much aligned around the perimeter of the parks. It makes sense because it opens up the central axis, the view from all directions. If you're coming up Charles Street, you can see the monument very clearly. It's a central axis. It's the most predominant thing for almost a half a mile. To restore the hardscaping as well as put in a planting that reflects that artistic style of that period, which also ties in and unifies with the other buildings on the square, I think is very important. Yes, there is a pastiche of Victorian architecture there on the square, but if you walk around, I think you'd be surprised at how many of those buildings are Beaux-Arts buildings from the 20th century. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioners, we've had, I guess...
I don't need to take any more time. I am the president of the Mount Vernon Club, and I have this in
Okay.
writing, which I'm very happy
Okay,
to
thank
submit.
you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Want to read it?
Would you like to read?
I want
Would you
to
like
make
to
sure that
speak your language?
the Commissioners understand what...
I was going to
Why don't you come up?
Why don't you just read it? and It's short enough, we can do that.
It is short.
Thank you.
My name is Sally McLean Young Ridgely, and I'm the president of the Mount Vernon Club. And we would like to support the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy. We understand that there has been a problem with communication, and we feel that there is room for compromise. We'd like to see this move forward. We feel that the benefits of providing enough nutrient-rich soil, an irrigation system, proper drainage, and planting native mature trees would offer the best opportunity for successful growth over the long term, not only for the trees, but other landscaping as well. All of this to be done within the current footprint. There'll be substantial demolition in order to install underground electrical services, replace sidewalks, and provide storm management system. All of these necessities, we feel, take precedence for the long-range health and beauty of the Mount Vernon Squares.
Thank you very much. Okay, now, thank you.
I can clean that up.
I guess rarely has the commission been treated to consistent passion and intellect around an issue, and I think, have been extremely impressed by everyone's thoughts and observations, and I sincerely appreciate all the time everybody has spent to get to this point. What I would hope that we can do now as a commission is sort of take the ball that we've been handed and try to, in whatever the right analogy is for the day, move along with what our opinions are, observations. Floor is open to commissioners. After all that.
Stunned to silence. Do we have to?
The architects.
I think I'd like to offer a couple of comments. I think overall, as a concept plan, as an overall guide for the future of Mount Vernon Square, the Olin plan does a lot of very good things. Early on in this process, I debated back and forth, look at the Carrera and Hastings layout, go back to the Olmsted plan. I'm a big Olmsted kind of guy myself. But I was impressed at the level of scholarship brought to the fore by Olin regarding the documentation of what's there today. I think we've all talked amongst ourselves here, recognize that this is the first step of a long step down towards something actually happening on the square there. And I concur with some other people's sentiments today that to do nothing would be the greatest travesty of all. We do need to do something for that park. It is in dire need of updating and repair. What I would suggest, and this is probably a proto-motion here, is that we move for conceptual approval of the plan with a series of codicils or caveats to go with this. A lot of it's tied to the notion of funding, that nothing here should be done until such time as the funding's in place to support it. The last thing I want to see done is, demolition begun and then, we're out of money, and you have a vacant square. That is a problem. We need to see funding in place as well as some form of bond, whatever is acceptable, to show that the capacity is there to carry this through. I'd also like to suggest that in all probability this will be done in phases. The likelihood of fundraising all at once, especially given the current climate, is doubtful. That being the case, looking at the four quadrants there, the quadrants I personally have the most difficult with doing a lot of extensive demolition of the trees would be the east and west quadrants. They seem to have the greatest number of extant trees, and looking at Commissioner Gibson's drawing here with all the green dots, certainly the east square has the greatest quantity of extant and quality trees in place. Both the North Plaza and South Plaza, I think, are of lesser value, and the South Plaza also has a number of other significant structural issues to accommodate. Accessibility is an issue. There's a lot of damage to the statuary and the general infrastructure there. So what I'd suggest is, if you're going to try the system that you're proposing here with the stormwater retention and the deeper trenching and the planting and all that, that you do that in one of those two squares first and make sure it works right. And at that point, then consider moving on. But
prior to doing that, also recognizing that you're going to have to come back before this commission here with much more extensive and detailed plans on a case-by-case basis. And with that, I will be quiet and let other people talk.
Thank you.
I would like to reinforce what Thomas just said, and again, I was impressed with the scholarship and the general sort of clarity of thought that the Olin report presents. And it's obviously a very tricky situation in that you are going to come back and refurbish and refresh the square, but you've got, in order to do that, there's going to be some disruption along the way. Obviously, the issues of utilities and drainage and new sidewalks, they have to be addressed regardless. So I would think that the commission would would consider again approving the plans, and if we would like to look at maybe what the recommendation from the December meeting was, maybe we could come up with a series of caveats that we want to add to frame that approval.
Also, I'd like to say you need to keep the communication open with the various association and the other parties, so everybody would know what's continuing going on as the progress continues.
I guess one thing I would add is that there ultimately has to be, as I understand it, an agreement, a written agreement between the city and the Conservancy, and that aspects of that agreement could in fact capture some of the things we've said, so that it is formalized in a way that
Right, that way it's documented.
is consistent with sort of the sense that we've heard today. Okay. I mean, I think it can be captured both in a motion generally and in a document with the city ultimately, specifically. Yes, sir.
Yeah, regarding phasing, I think it's, for the sake of the neighborhood, we should just do one park at a time, rather, regardless of the funding availability. Do one square, one of the four, complete that, and then move to the next one.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to remember whether there's anything I've spent more time on. I'm not even certain why. But I've read everything that everyone has sent. I've read this many times. I think I know every tree in this park, and I guess it's always difficult when you have just, everybody's a good guy. It's not figuring out, there aren't any bad guys here. So that's hard when you try and do that. So being a law professor, I go, and a teacher of evidence, my orientation ultimately is the law and what the evidence is. The law here that governs us is our guidelines. We aren't told just do what we think it feels good. There's some rules that we are expected to follow. And with respect to trees and other plantings, there's a section beginning on page 59 of our guidelines. And it talks about trees and other plantings having measurable positive impact on the urban environment. And then it says, it lists about 9 factors. Now, we aren't told that these are listed in order of priority, but I think it's significant, at least I find it significant. The lead paragraph says, the preservation, maintenance, and establishment of trees and plantings should have a high priority. And then there are 9 factors, and the number 1 factor says, preserve, protect, and maintain healthy trees in yards and along streetscapes. Now, what that tells me is that the presumption is in favor of preserve, protect, and maintain healthy trees. And so if the evidence is equipoise or you're uncertain, that the burden of proof doesn't mean that you never sanction the removal of a tree, but the burden of proof is on the side that wishes to remove a healthy tree. So I take that as a starting place. Then I examine the evidence, and this is where I have the the greatest difficulty supporting the recommendation. First, I'm not convinced by what I've seen here that this uniformity of species and size of tree is dictated by anything that anyone has shown us thus far coming from the Kara Hastings design. We're told on page 7 of their plan that, quote, no definitive planting plans have been located for the Kara Hastings from the Kara Hastings office. And then it says that information on planting contemporary with the realization has been gleaned from the photographs. I've asked for the photographs and I've examined the photographs. And the photograph that I'm most frequently directed to, really, they're on page 20 and 21 of the plan. The one on page 21 is not supportive of this, because the first thing, it's a mixture of shrubberies and trees. It's definitely not this plan. The first thing that you see are big shrubberies. Then there are two trees that they certainly are not the same size. They may be the same species or not. Then there is the drawing on the next page, which looks like shrubberies again. Then there are these other photos over here where it's really hard to tell what they are. I've asked were there any architectural drawings, and I saw one drawing that had some symbols that seemed to be equally spaced that I think were intended to be trees. So I think that it's pretty safe to say that a fairly uniform spacing of trees may have been, but it's very may have been contemplated. But I just have not seen evidence that an integral part of their design was this uniformity and regimentation of style and species of trees. It may have been the case, but I don't think we have ever been presented any convincing evidence of that. As to the necessity to do all of this because of some groundworks and all, I'm not sure what's the chicken and the egg there, because we've never really had a plan to know what really is intended, to know whether there's some alternative ways. I mean, that one, again, just from an evidentiary perspective, is not to me convincing, because I start out now with what the law is. But I guess probably most disturbing, as I've said, most disturbing too many times, has been this process. I am really disappointed that there, at what I view as the rigidity and unwillingness on the part of the Conservancy to even attempt to compromise. I mean, I was serious 2 months ago when I drew this up as something that's at least try to figure out, is there some way that we realize that we aren't starting here with a tabula rasa. We're talking about a public park where there are a wide range of people who have lots of interests, conflicting views, conflicting attitudes. There are a lot of stakeholders here, and it's not just one group's idea. That this is that some degree of compromise, I hoped, would be tried. I believe that it was not. And in light of some meetings I've had, I think, but I got me a little bit of compromise. I mean, well, 4 trees, what I call the untouchables. So I'm feeling good, and I'm feeling a little bad, because they really did take the little steam out of me with respect to that, because and so I've been sitting here saying, look, the elm tree's safe. You got me going for a while. But when I get back to the law and the evidence, and that's my problem with your proposal, is I see on the part of the Conservancy no willingness to even try to compromise. And by compromise means fewer trees. What I've seen from then is compromise means that their plan is, let's cut down all the trees, the other ones don't. And so the conservatives' compromise is, let's cut down all the trees. I haven't seen anything, any willingness to even consider an alternative other than removing all the trees except a few. So I don't think your proposal is going to work.
Okay.
I don't think that unless there's some change in a Horton approach, I think that it's damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead on the part of this, the Conservancy. And so, let's work it out thing, I don't see it happening. And therefore, for that reason, I will, I'm in opposition to the plan in concept.
I'd just like to say that I think that the plan will evolve over time. That it's not going to be all or nothing tomorrow if we approve this design. And that over time, there may be, because of the way things develop, the Conservancy, changes its attitude, changes its mind, the residents, become more supportive of it. All we're looking for now is approval of this concept, which talks about, it talks about improvements to the sidewalks, to lighting, to utilities, to underground sewage, all of which the squares desperately need at this time. To walk through Mount Vernon
What's before
Place.
us today is the tree plan. We've already approved the building, the concrete and all of that. What's before us and what we're debating is the tree.
Well, but you can't do those other things in a proper manner. There'll be some problem with the
Any
trees.
evidence that they say that, but we haven't, what have we seen? Their plan did not call, this plan that they prepared did not call for the removal of all the trees. They listed, there were 40-some trees not to be by their plan. So this removal of all the trees is a late starting thing, even under their plan. So if we now approve in concept removal of essentially all the trees, okay, that's, well, anyway, I don't know. Looks like I'm in a minority here, so we'll just get
If I could, I don't want to say no.
Let me give a couple other folks a chance.
My feeling is that if we're talking about a concept in its broadest meaning, we're talking about a starting point to get from what it is that people need at this time to how do we get that done? What are down to implementation? And we're at the starting point. We know, as David had said, there's some things that are needed. The trees is something that we need to talk about. It's a need. I don't think to approve the concept that we need to do something about, that we have a plan and we need to alter that plan to include some additional things, like consideration of the trees, like consideration of the sidewalks, like consideration of railings, anything else that the neighborhood has concerned about. We cannot list those as things that are needed to be developed and brought back to us at another time in what might be a final plan or almost a final plan. But we have to have a starting point so we can approve the concept with the caveats that final approval is dependent on information in detail about these other concerns that both the community has raised and the commissioners have raised in their review.
If I could talk a little further here, I actually do agree with Commissioner Gibson in substance on a lot of this, that I would suggest that, and so the South Square has not that much, and so if you want to try and play somewhere, that would be a place to sort of
No
test some
question
ideas
that
out. And in saying, coming back for further conversation, you know, I I am concerned, especially about those east and west squares, that those seem to have the greatest extent of historic materials and trees that have resonance of their own history there, and there is value to that, and I don't want to be seen as having discounted that at all. I think as we continue to explore the development of this plan, part of the charge of this will be coming back with, do you really need to take those trees down? And we keep asking, we keep hearing yes, but I am with you. I'm not convinced yet
You proved
that...
today they intend to. Let's be clear about that.
I don't think,
These
I don't
folks
think,
intend to remove those trees.
but I think the concept has to include, one of the caveats has to be a final decision of the trees. And I think that we have enough evidence regarding from experts regarding the value of trees, that we are not talking about certainly this group going off and thinking they can take down the majority of the trees, let alone all of the trees. I think that is a valuable sticky point in the concept, but I think we have to red flag it and say, don't come back to us until there is full consideration all the way around, expert advice regarding the trees in this Mount Vernon Square. We've got to have that. That's part of the beauty, that's part of the appeal of the square. Now, to debate which ones or what not here, I don't think is quite what the commissioners should be doing. I think we have to give the community direction as to what they need to do to make this concept come to, because it's a concept. It isn't even a real plan. If we just move from a concept to give them some directions to developing a plan and letting them know one of the things you've got to include in here is a convincing discussion of the trees, not the removal of them, of all of them, but a convincing discussion of the trees, what is going to be left, why, how maintained, where, all of that kind of thing. But I think we have to get to that point by first starting with the concept, plan, detail, and then final plan.
Yes, ma'am.
As I've said before, I'm in favor of this plan. Like everybody, I have some considerations, but I think we have to be clear, it is a plan.
Well, you may be right. I see it.
And it is a drawing.
I think you're right. I just, from a policy standpoint, a public policy, which is my background, I would not see this as a real plan. I would see this as a concept or a proposal for a plan, because I think it has too many discrepancies in it to be considered a real plan. Now, that's just an intellectual view, yeah.
Can we craft all this?
The big issue, obviously, is the trees. And in my opinion, it's a very formal setting, and the suggestion here is a very formal garden in a very formal setting. And it's very hard to take this formal garden and make it half formal, or, you got a straight line of trees here but a tree over there. So it sort of lends itself to inflexibility. But if you like the formal garden, that's what it is. It's a very structured aesthetic.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I think the east is already, you take those three out in the middle there, you already have a formal, the trees are right in line with each other, they're healthy. It'll be 50 years before, 35 years before these trees that they're going to plant. They won't get that tall in our lifetime, I'll tell you that. Their new trees will not reach the luscious, the extent of these in our lifetime. So, and they're already, look at the east one. It's already, they're in line. And so if someone really wanted to talk compromise, to preserve you're formal, you have the structure, they would say, okay, you'd go, the south, I think everybody will agree, there's not much left other than the magnolia in the south square, that's not, that you couldn't live without. In the north square, they're healthy, but they're not that big, and if you had to work something out, you could let that be redone. I mean, so if they really wanted to compromise, they would say, let's do our rigidity thing where you get the most traffic going up Charles Street, and then these flanges are more in the community. We're going to have a little relaxation there, and they can still have the trees lined in, but there may be some old and some new. I mean, there's basis for compromise if there was a willingness to compromise.
But
I think there's no willingness to compromise.
if it's a formal garden, it's spacing and shape, and that's
Yeah, but it's
that's
not
how it's organized.
absolutely, and you have some spacing and you have shaping, and let's get back to the formal garden thing there. People keep saying Kara Hastings. This is not that plan. There are things that they want to do that are different from the original plan. So it's a Kara Hastings inspired somewhat. But we don't, but as to that element of it, that's where I haven't seen the evidence. The photos they keep presenting don't support what, there's nothing that we've seen except a picture of a garden in France. There's one, we got in this book here, when the king starts out with a blank piece of land, he can do anything he wants to, and he can have, people standing there. But we haven't seen any evidence that rigidity, that soldier rigidity of everything looking the same, one behind the other, one tree after the other, is what's required. I'm not even sure it's attractive, but I don't know, but that's a matter of taste. But they've certainly not produced any evidence to show that kind of rigidity and inflexibility and uniformity is required to produce the effect they want.
Okay.
I just get back to the basic point. I don't disagree with you, Larry, at all. I'm saying that is a direction to the group of what they need to do to make this plan acceptable. These are good points. Now you know what you've got to go back and do. But I don't think that destroys the merit of the total merit of the plan.
Is there, pull this together now, I think if we're close enough, maybe.
Annette had her hand up, and after that,
Then I put my hand down. Well, I just wanted to say, getting to this discussion of, I like the formality, I don't like the formality, I don't think that's our place to be doing that. I think, as some have said already, do we approve of the concept in general? And personally, I'm a little more convinced. I feel like the blueprints that are reproduced here do show, a formal layout of trees. They don't say anything about the species, size, shape of the trees. And in fact, the Conservancy's plan is to have different trees, different species, different character for each square. And I think that's sort of a flexibility concept that ought to be developed further. But, I do think that we can make a recommendation on the general concept, which is about more than just the trees, with some of these caveats that say, look, there are specific things that you need to go back and look at more carefully. I personally have been interested in, my understanding is that the state-of-the-art trenches that will maintain the long-term health of the trees are a big part of what's driving the removal of all the trees, because once you implement that sort of thing, there's no way to keep the existing trees. What I've asked in the past, and I haven't really heard a response yet, is that are there other ways to ensure the long-term longevity of these trees, the health of the trees, and that kind of thing. And I think that, again, these guys have been doing a very conceptual plan. If they're asked to go back and develop a further plan, then I think those kinds of details can get worked out. I've heard people in the audience say that there are other ways to maintain healthy trees without the sort of long tree trench. I don't know personally what is out there and what exists, but there may be a way to do something like that that would allow some of the trees, and I wouldn't say it's specifically the ones that have been named here, but perhaps some of the trees can stay and be a part of the plan. But I think the sort of the formality, which again is going back to, you say that there's some confusion about, well, they're restoring, but they're not really restoring. They've said that they're rehabilitating Mount Vernon Place. What that allows you to do is restore some aspects and rehabilitate others, and in fact, this is a 21st century place now. There's a lot of stuff that we know about today that we can do today that wasn't known about when this plan was first implemented. So, just to conclude, I think that we can approve the general concept with a very specific direction about things that need to be worked out in more detail and with some more flexibility.
I guess the question is, can we also, as has been suggested, make sure there's a formal mechanism to continue the dialogue,
Yes,
which I think is
absolutely.
crucial to anything that, one, anything that we might recommend, and two, could proceed to us even reviewing future drawings. I mean, that there's some process that we know has been in place. Okay.
Could we look at the staff recommendations from
December?
From December, because I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about
Are there?
were there.
Yep.
It's amazing. Back to the archives and get that.
Yeah, bring it back in.
That's
Number
it.
3 and 4.
You want to make a
Can we-
motion starting with that?
Can we
Somebody?
see 1 and 2, please? Thank you.
Has number 2 been resolved?
Yes.
Other than the fact they have to revise the drawings at some point. The agreement is that everyone's agreed that if they follow what's agreed to there, that they're agreed to have that agreed.
Agreed to
That they won't do anything until everybody agrees.
Perhaps that should be revised to say the Conservancy will not submit final drawings to CHAP. Well, I think that all the parties have to do some more work before it's ready to come back to CHAP.
Essentially, that's what's been
Yeah.
agreed to.
I think this goes to the issue that I think the Conservancy and Olin have their marching orders regarding this, that they know what they have to do, but they need to be cut loose to the next step before they do it. And obviously, we would expect to see the final plan to incorporate these agreements.
Having consensus between somebody who wants to cut the tree down and somebody who doesn't want to cut the tree down is not such an easy thing. Are we telling Olin to compromise the formality of their garden because we're not going to accept it the way it is, because the people who want to keep the trees aren't ever going to enjoy of the formal garden that they've suggested?
Well, wouldn't that go to another, that's the idea of community outreach and...
And forming that one community.
But you-
Remember, the next
The
step was
community.
the staff was to encourage the Conservancy, the Tree Coalition, and institutions surrounding the park to meet as one committee, to form as one committee.
And I hope that the commission...
It would be fine with the staff if our current statement for today's meeting is number 10 or 11 or whatever it may be, because this was our recommendation before the commission reviewed and deliberated and made the motions about the committee.
And I hope it's clear to the applicant and the community that we wouldn't casually approve something that hadn't had suitable scrutiny at some future date. I mean, I think, I don't know how else we can say it, and encourage that the city agreement with, as we said, the city agreement with the Conservancy be as strict and as rigid about that as possible. I mean, I think
But what are
we
telling-
can't force
what are we
it to
telling the
happen. We
Conservancy?
have to
Are
be
we
clear
telling
that
them-
we expect it to happen.
Are we telling them to compromise and loosen up the formality?
Well, they've heard what we've said, and we've...
If that's what we're telling them to do?
Well, I think, let's kind of go through six, I'm not sure how many additional recommendations follow up here. Well, who wants 8?
Well, as a
What- Go ahead.
as a function of reviewing the detailed plans, as Helena says, we are looking only at a concept now. This is the list of things that we intend to do. It doesn't go into any definition of how we're going to do them, how we're going to approach them, how we're going to finance what the timetable is. It just says, this is our goal. This is what we want to do at the end of the day. It doesn't give you it doesn't tell you, starting from A to B, the route to take, which could be any number of routes. So anything they bring back to CHAP will obviously have to have neighborhood input. So this will be only the beginning of a round of discussions between the neighborhood of the Conservancy and other, interested parties to work out what the plan and what the detail will be.
But see, it's impossible.
But, okay, to maybe potentially add a little more direct guidance here,
I think you approve, when you say approve, okay. I think that's window dressing.
But what I'd say, potentially then, as in, point 10 or 11 we're talking about here is, Commissioner Gibson, what I think you pointed out very succinctly is the north and south squares have less botanic integrity and are definitely going to be bypassed a lot more, that I think that we could see greater flexibility to work in those squares. I think a number of us are not convinced that the wholesale demolition of the trees in the east and west squares is warranted, and if the Conservancy were to come back with that as a ongoing recommendation, they would need to be much more convincing as to why that is the case. And we would strongly encourage them to find alternate means to retain more of that existing tree canopy, specifically in the east and west squares.
Then maybe would you put in there a square by square approval of CHAP with respect to trees?
I think-
That's going to happen anyway.
Well, I mean, there's a request to do a square by square phasing anyway, as part of that. And of that, I would say, if you want to be explicit about it, implicit is, it's not just a hardscape, but the softscape, including the trees as well. But certainly, if you want to be explicit and say, including a square by square review and treatment of all aspects of those squares, hard and soft. That's.
They have to give that to
I
us in
understand,
the
but
plan.
I understand that, but
Being a legal scholar, would you care to craft a?
Well, no, I'm trying, I guess I don't know what approval, the word approval means. What is being approved? Are we saying in principle that we are in agreement with the approach, which is essentially the removal of all but 4 trees?
No, I don't think we're saying that.
Well, on the record,
That's what.
sort of indicates that. I thought that's what what this approval was.
I think
clear with that.
I think what we're talking about in general is, there's talking about a public-private partnership, which has been presented here. That in general seems to be something that we're trying to encourage. As part of that, they need to go through a series of reviews and approvals. We have so far, in essence, released them to proceed with the restoration of the monument by itself, in term for the anniversary coming up here. But at this point, they have no release for anything else beyond that. That means no hardscape, no sidewalks, no accessibility, no, all that kind of stuff, which has to be funded, by the way. That's part of our requirements here, is that we see phasing and funding requirements. And, once again, to be explicit, nothing here can proceed without funding in place and some form of bonding to show that the financial capacity is there to execute the work that's being proposed. And with that also, then, they'll be coming back on a square-by-square basis, and the monument separately, I'm guessing, since it's the heart of it all, presenting more detailed plans that will be much less conceptual and much more, here's how we want to execute this
Much more
project.
toward implementation.
As long as we
We'll be seeing
get
them a
in
lot
the-
more.
As long as we get
That's
the
how you
tree
advance.
thing and can we get that into the language so it's clear? Because I misunderstood. I thought that you were approving the concept of cutting down the trees. The concept. Now they have to come back, but.
I think that's what the plan asks for.
Well, so that is your interpretation?
Yes.
Well, okay, but he's saying it isn't. That's what I'm trying to determine. Is this a resolution that proves in concept of cutting down the trees?
So I will,
I
so
don't think it does, and he thinks it doesn't, so.
Oh, I will be explicit then, in terms of, I will make a formal motion here.
Okay, I'd like to say something first. Again, I think it's a good plan. I do think it's a fairly specific plan. I like most of the specifics. A lot of you don't. I'm sorry, we disagree. Perhaps, I think if we approve it in concept, we're simply saying, and then having to schedule each and every square in action, we're simply saying, we like the idea that the parks will be redone. Sounds great, go do it. But no guidelines as to what's to be done.
But is
those
it
are
your
the
interpretation
guidelines.
that we're approving the cutting down of the trees?
And I think it is subject to much further discussion, but I think we are
What we
approving
ought
the
not
design.
leave it here was ambiguity.
But I think
Even if
we are-
even if I lose, I don't want to leave it with ambiguity.
Would it satisfy you to say the plan must include the staff recommendations? Must include a discussion, a detailed discussion of the implementation of the staff recommendations as spelled out in the December meeting.
Okay, well, that's fine, and that may be enough for part of it. Can we get
The other part is
more
what?
detailed about
tree
the
part.
squares and try to get that?
Well, okay, including, and you can go ahead with
So
the
what I
inclusive
would,
part.
to be explicit about it, because one of our goals here is to give you guys clear direction to move forward from here, so we don't come back a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, all going, we still don't agree about the trees. We will be here forever and never get anything done. We would like to move forward with that. That being said, what I would suggest, what I will move, and you can agree or not agree, move to allow a greater degree of flexibility and greater adherence with the current plan for the north and south squares. The east and west squares, which have the greater integrity of the tree canopy, we are skeptical of the need for the wholesale demolition of that and are asking that the Mount Vernon Conservancy and Olin Partnership come back with an alternate approach to trying to retain as many of those trees as possible, or greater validation that there is no way to preserve them in situ, which the fact that they exist as they do right now says that they are still, that they're surviving as they are right now.
Tom, I didn't get on.
I'm close to that, as long as my 4 trees, I'm getting there. As long as my 4
I got
trees
half
are
of
grandfathered in, period.
They've agreed to that. Are we close? Is there a time limit on this? I mean, Tom's discussion about coming back with another plan, when does that happen? Does that
It's
happen?
subject, I think anytime, my sense has been that anytime we review other plans is at a time when there's funding and.
Right.
And the funding, by the way, we should look at is fees, if they're appropriate fees, construction costs, maintenance and management costs.
Right.
Expenses.
Well,
I mean, it
what's the-
isn't just the cost to put the
Which is
trees
in
in.
the staff recommendation.
They spell out of
We've gotten
the,
a lot of that
in the
already.
concept.
We've gotten the management.
They're going to be asking for funds to do something, and we're not clear about what we want them to do. I think it's only fair to say we either like this formal garden or we don't. If we have a formal garden here and an informal garden there, I think that's goofy. I think we should say we either want an informal garden or a formal garden, and that'll give them some direction of where to go.
I don't think you could argue right now that what's there right now is informal, is part of it, is that,
There's also a motion mostly on the table. I don't know if there's a second to it, but
May I read back what I have? Because I
let's try
may
to
not
get-
have all of
let's
it.
try and see if we can get
Okay.
through this.
To move to allow a greater degree of flexibility for the north and south squares. And did I hear you say in adhering to the
Yeah,
plan?
the current plan as proposed is in greater acceptance
Okay,
for the north and south squares.
okay, let me get that. In greater acceptance with the plan, okay. On the east and west squares, you were skeptical about the need for the wholesale, I think you said demolition of the trees.
Right.
And we would ask the Mount Vernon Conservancy to come back with an alternate approach that does not call for the wholesale removal of trees.
Works for me.
And what am I missing?
That's fine.
Is there a second?
Second. Okay.
Okay. Any more relevant discussion here, folks?
Think about that. Let me think about that. So,
While you're thinking,
you know, I'm thinking, so this is by resolution, the compromise that we were trying to get them to do.
Something like that.
Oh, no, okay, but they
You
couldn't
can't
do
get
it.
it in this meeting.
So this kind of, they can move on ahead up here, and we'll, so let me hear that again.
I think I'm going to add additional commentary of that since I came in.
Move to allow a greater degree of flexibility for the north and south squares with greater acceptance of the plan as submitted. On the east and west squares, the commission's skeptical about the need for wholesale demolition of the trees and ask the Mount Vernon Conservancy to come back with an alternate approach that does not call for wholesale removal of
Okay,
trees.
but we're going to add an amendment, a friendly amendment.
amendment.
It's not to come back, but to continue to resume or begin a serious dialogue with the community about the whole thing. I mean, and so somehow.
Which word do you prefer, resume or begin? Resume.
Sounds like the last meeting wasn't much of a
Let's be
thing.
charitable and say continue.
Continue.
Genuine, just have a genuine, to have a
Okay.
genuine dialogue continue, or, I don't say continue, because everyone says it didn't happen, so, is to undertake, that's the word, and a genuine dialogue and with the, interested community, fancy it up with words, so,
okay.
so we.
With
we-
interested community partners?
We're getting there, we're getting there.
I will accept that as a friendly amendment,
Did-
yes.
Whatever I said, don't ask me to repeat it, would you write it up?
Community
To undertake a
members.
genuine dialogue with interested community partners?
Partners, members,
Community.
Well, since then, look, let's actually, we're including the save, since they are specific people, Save the Tree Alliance,
and other.
including, and another.
Including-
Save the Tree Alliance and other interested, since they've got a specific group, there's one specific group, and these
Okay.
other people.
Okay.
And the public.
I was going to say, it's
And
really the
don't leave out
public
the
at large,
public.
anybody
That was
who's
the-
Well,
interested.
yeah,
Okay.
but I want
right, we'll
to,
let
they showed
Kathleen
up here, the Save the Tree Alliance.
Get the
I can
final
hear
words
right.
right.
Okay.
All right.
So we're getting
One more,
there.
let's go.
So let me make sure we understand.
This is the motion that the commission will approve the conceptual study as presented by the Conservancy with the following requirements. Yes.
As
Yes,
further
and
modified by
it's in
staff
addition to what
recommendations.
that
Yes.
said, we've added this other
Yeah.
dialogue.
All right, so we now have something we
All
can...
right, I'm going to call for the question.
so that- let me just-
Hold on.
No,
We're getting there. So it's because I don't understand this approval here. That wasn't a part of, yours wasn't, what was
This-
yours?
We are moving to approve the conceptual plan as presented, as modified by the 87 staff recommendations that were included in the December, which deals a lot with the administrative approvals and regulatory controls and financing, and the additional language of a page and a half of dialogue that has been written down here regarding the approvals and the friendly amendment that you just gave us.
Whole package.
Still going to call for the question. All right, all those in favor,
I'm
aye?
thinking, no, I'm slow.
Well, that's all right, but we can't.
I'm-
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I didn't have time to think. I'm still opposed. I think I could have gotten there, but you wouldn't give me time. I
Okay.
oppose.
Motion carries. We welcome any refinements that people can think of, but
I was thinking, you gave me a chance to think. I think.
okay.
I'll make it grammatically.
All right, thank you all. I think hopefully we found a route to make this a reasonable effort going forward. I thank the commission for getting bloody together. But let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.